Okay, we are unmuted.
Okay, we'll call a meeting to order at 10:02. We need to do a roll call. You can do it?
I got it, got the list.
Go ahead.
Okay, Sean,
Here.
Scott,
Here.
Steve. Here. Bruce,
Here.
Brian,
Here.
Mike,
Here.
Dave, Keisha, Lee.
Here. Do we have any discussion or possible excuse? Is Mike's gonna be on?
Oh, you mean, Dave? I just texted him, he said he would attend, he was gonna attend, I don't know, I just texted him, we just resent the link, I don't know, I haven't heard anything from Keisha.
Oh, yes, we have.
Oh, we have?
Yeah.
Oh,
She has a meeting.
She's got an appointment.
so I don't know, he usually attends these, so I don't know if there are any issues or not, but.
I mean, you can always circle back if you
Okay,
want.
we'll circle back. All right. Housekeeping?
Housekeeping. Okay, good morning, everybody, virtually and in real life. So just as a reminder, if you are a committee member, we ask that you have your camera on. For everyone who is on virtually, you want to stay muted unless you are actively speaking, just to prevent the lawn noise and everything else that tends to happen when you have a virtual meeting. And if you want to, as a committee member, if you want to speak, and I don't fear this with this group, just speak up, right? But you can also use that raise hand function, which looks like, for us, it's on the bottom of our screen, though sometimes it's on the top of the screen, I don't know. But it looks like a smiley face with a hand, and you raise it, and then don't forget to unraise it, or somebody will say, hey, do you mean to have your hand up? And they're like, no, that was from before. So that's guaranteed to happen, but you can use that function. So if you're a committee member, try and have your camera on, and feel free to speak up and engage. And then on this end, the microphone on this is pretty good, but towards the end of the table, you'll want to speak up. You don't have to shout, but you'll want to speak up. And yeah, so and I'll tell you, it can pick up the occasional side comments. So be cool, everybody. And then the only other thing I'll say that's not really housekeeping, but there is coffee and there's water, so please make yourselves at home.
Perfect.
I heard from Dave, he's gonna be a little late, but he is.
Okay. All right. Item number 4, remarks from chair. I don't really have anything. I wasn't able to attend the commissioners meeting because of my wife's dad's funeral. But Scott went. I don't think there was anything. Did you have anything to report?
No, we didn't speak.
Okay.
I was there for any comments or questions.
Okay. Perfect. I think y'all got to address the commissioners meeting. What didn't get pushed in there.
Right. And I forgot, Mike sent me the message he sends me every time we have this meeting, which is, don't forget to sign the roster if you want CE credit.
All right. All right. Item number 5, ratification of minutes from July 18th. Any changes or any problems in the minutes? Anybody saw? Motion approved. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. We have item number 6. Do we have any comments from visitors? I don't think we received anything in writing.
Do we have any emails from anybody?
I don't believe we received any emails from anybody.
Nothing. No. 7, reports from subcommittees. Education subcommittee, Lee?
We were trying to meet, but it just didn't quite work out, so we're going to try next quarter.
Okay. All right, Scott, subcommittee?
We finally met this morning.
Fire.
We're actually have a couple things we're gonna bring forward that's in material. We'll talk about those shortly. And,
Okay. All right. Item number 8, staff reports.
Yes, I'm gonna let Vanessa talk about rules
for just a second, and then I'll give you a few reports, and then I'll pass it to Summer.
Perfect.
Okay, good morning again, everyone. That's what it is. Okay, so, at the last inspector meeting in July, seems like a decade ago, the group voted to move forward with some rule changes, to, I guess, to 222. As part of, there's a whole batch of TREC rules that did not go forward at the August meeting because the governor's office, they've got to review all of our meetings, and we sent them, one, quite a batch of rules. And two, they've indicated to us that they're working through sort of their internal process for review at this time. So that rule did not go forward. It is on pause. We can't move forward with rules until we get that go ahead. But I just wanted to let you all know that's the reason why, and it was not just the inspector rule, right? It was a whole group of rules unrelated to each other. And once we have the indication that we can move forward, we'll go ahead and do that. But just to let everyone on this call know, they were held back, and it was a whole batch, and we think it's really more of a they're just sort of tackling their review process at the moment.
So we think it's process related and not substantive.
Right.
Time will tell.
It's on hold for indefinite period.
Yes. We are in active, we regularly check in.
Yeah.
To see if we can get those to break free. At the same time, we have had a change in the policy advisor, who is our point of contact at the governor's office. So that likely delay things a little bit too, just as the new policy advisor comes up to speed and figures out where we are, but it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
Okay, few just operational things at TREC. We're in the process of hiring a new IT director because our IT director, Steve Rapp, is retiring at the end of November. That process is going well. Excited about where we are with it. Stay tuned on that front. We're actively preparing for the legislative session, which starts mid-January, which is like tomorrow. So we have our plan mapped out. Bill filing will begin in the middle of November, so in about a month. So it's basically here. I think we're in a really good place in terms of we've planned ahead. We've coordinated with Texas Realtors and other associations. We've talked to the governor's office about, plans. We've coordinated with legislative office. I think we're in a good spot. And then lastly, there has been conversation about communications going out to inspectors. And Summer Mandel is here to go into great depth to any extent you'd like to. Lee brought this up, but I wanted to just start that conversation by saying, really excited to have Summer on staff. I think that she's brought great meaning to our communications division. She has really taught me and helped me to understand that that what we need to be communicating is information that license holders need to hear. It's not so much exactly what we want to tell them, right? Sometimes I want to just report to them on all the meetings we've had and, kind of provide commentary, but Summer has helped us make these communications much more meaningful and specific. And by doing so, I think you'll see by the information she has that our open rates have more than doubled, which means that people seem to, trust us enough to click on what we're sending them more so than ever before. So I am grateful for that. She can go into as much detail on that as you wish, but from here, Summer?
Yeah. So hello everyone. I've been around, but I work a lot. So I'm Summer Mandel, as Chelsea said, and I'm doing communication stuff for the agency. And so I heard from Lee, who wanted to discuss communications some in this meeting. And as Chelsea said, I'm happy to go as in-depth as you'd like, or, just a few items. So one question we had was about getting inspector insight. So we send those newsletters through GovDelivery, which is our email marketing system. And there's a variety of audiences who get inspector insight. So one is like tagged inspectors, so licensed inspectors. And then people can subscribe to inspector insight just if they're interested in doing so. So there could be people who aren't inspectors who are getting that newsletter. So if you're not getting the newsletter, which are there folks here that aren't getting it or not?
So I'm not getting it, plus I was at a couple different trade association meetings in the last couple of months since our conversation, and none of them are getting it either. So I think something has changed. So I know that I was getting them before, but now I'm not, even in my junk, because I check my junk every single day. So something's happening to where it's not actually showing up. I don't know what, it's probably some click or some switch or something, but
Yeah, for
I'm not
your
the only one
case,
affected.
for your case in particular, I mean, I think I'm gonna have to put in a ticket with Granicus because you're in the system, you're subscribed to the topic, and it, like I had mentioned, it says it's being delivered, but I don't have like the whole world of knowledge of how that system works. But if there are other folks who have that issue, then that's something I can do for you too, is one, look and see if you're subscribed to the email address that you prefer. Two, you also have to be subscribed to that topic specifically, so it's not just a matter of putting in your email address and we necessarily know. I want to point out too that there's kind of two separate email systems going on. So with me, that's going to be marketing and communications emails. And then in Versa, that's going to be license related information. So you can opt out of receiving my emails, but you can't, I don't think, opt out of Versa stuff, because that's going to be, don't forget to renew. You need, there's a lot of personal information that goes there. So, so if you think you're subscribed and you're not getting it, then get with me, let me know, and I want to look into that for you. If you're not getting it and you don't think you're subscribed, we can fix that too. Was there anything else on that? I mean,
Like I said, it's more than I think just saying, here's my email address, can you check on this? Because like I said, between the two meetings that I went to, that's 60 people that used to get it that are not getting it, which tells me there's
Are you
something.
getting open rates or are you getting
Yeah,
bounce rates?
I mean,
There
more
are-
than ever before are reading it.
yeah,
But that may not, I don't know if, do they get like rates of the emails getting bounced back?
yes, yeah, we do. And so it could be undeliverable for a variety of reasons. One is our email address that we use is blacklisted, so you'd have to tag us as a safe sender. Another is that your inbox is full. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes there are other reasons why it will go and it won't work one time, they'll try it another time, but eventually those will roll off of our subscriptions because they're not valid.
We're pretty sure that the mandatory emails are getting, is there any way to maybe utilize that for a one-time?
No.
You can't do that.
The,
I mean, what,
the inspector sent inside is going out every quarter.
Right, that's correct. So, so those are timed with your meetings
Right.
essentially, and so I've worked with Sean, so at the beginning of the year, Sean and I met to talk about how do you want to communicate, and we discussed a few different options and decided, a lot of the content comes from your meetings and things you decide, so that's when we send out
So
inspector
it's
insight.
less than it was before. We used to be kind of on a monthly system, which
Usually-
is
It was
less
usually 8
logical.
times a year,
Okay, there
because
you go.
I do one, then you would do one, I would do one, you would
Right.
do one, but it was only.
So this is a different system, so the schedule is less, so can't count on it as frequently, but you can count on it being content rich.
We're also started doing Facebook stuff, right, and incorporating some of that.
Yeah, and there've been
General
some,
check advisor.
so it actually, yeah, in general Trek Advisor as well, there's a, every time there's a recap, that goes in the Trek Advisor, that goes to like every license holder who wants that. And then when we were recruiting for a public member, that was in Trek Advisor as well. So it gets sprinkled across. The way that I look at Inspector Insight is that it's audience first. So whatever is relevant to inspectors, that's what you're gonna get there. And then it's less about duplicative content, which when I looked back at the universe of 2021, there was a lot of duplicative content, things that weren't necessarily specific to inspectors that were in your inspector insight. It was stuff that was in TREIC Advisor as well. And to Chelsea's point, when I look at the quantity versus the quantity this year and then the open rates and engagement, it's much higher for this year than it was last year with the number of articles or whatever being posted. So we can look at those numbers too.
I don't want to beat this to death. Like I said, my thing is, obviously, from my perspective, I'm not getting them the way that I was, even though your system, according to you, is saying that they're being delivered. I'm not getting them. And so there's something obviously going on with my email address. But when I start asking multiple others that are license holders that are not getting it, it tells me there's something else going on.
Well, it's
So
really
if you
hard
could just
for me
look.
to know if I don't know who those people are. I can't really look in the system and see if they're subscribed or if they've had an issue with their email address or anything like that. So, while I appreciate that information and certainly want everyone who wants to receive it to get it, if there are people you know of who aren't getting it and that's an issue, I need to speak to them directly.
Add me to the list.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I was looking at, there's something that has changed from TREC's perspective as to how that's delivered. Something in how that has changed.
It's only the
It's
frequency.
causing the
This
difference.
is a weird conversation to be having here.
So I like to see, there's something that I think is causing the communications to not.
Well, maybe
For
what we
a
can
number of
do,
people.
when we get together and then we figure out the date that's gonna come out, then we can make everybody on the committee at least aware of when the insight's coming out. And then they can reach out to the people they've been talking to see if they're receiving them at that time.
And we could share, I'm sorry, I didn't mean.
No.
If we wanted to share how best to coordinate that effort with Summer, in terms of how to address that technical issue, to see if we can
Yeah,
peel back that onion. But, this is an advisory group to inform policy, and this is not a policy issue.
but, I understand where Lee's coming from, and we wanna make sure that's addressed as far as
Absolutely.
communications of everything that's going on in these meetings, so the inspectors that don't come or don't listen or don't review the minutes will get a good summary of what's going on. So I think we just work together on the next one, and we see who gets it, we just be more intentional on what date is coming out, and then let everybody know, and we'll just go from there.
And Summer's data will be, we can match up the data y'all have with what her data is in terms of what
Yeah.
number of
Yeah.
receipt versus open versus click through, the information that we're able to gather on who's doing what with our emails is pretty, detailed.
Yeah, so I think while it's valid that there may be people who aren't getting it or don't realize that they're getting it, because again, the frequency has changed, the subject lines have even changed, because it used to be like Inspector Insight here, now it's the content within the newsletter. So that helps with open rates too, because people know, oh, there's something in here for me to see. So there are lower open rates for all of those newsletters last year when it was just Inspector Insight with no other information. So, there's a lot of different things going on that make it more engaging, and the information, again, it's time to these meetings, what you guys have on. Last year there were more things going on with the SOPs. There were some education changes with elective CE. What else? There was something else that happened. I want to say there's one more thing. This year though, a huge thing that you guys are pushing through is COT. So the communication on that essentially stopped, because we're not trying to make people concerned about what happened to these rules. They're just, or these proposals, they're just caught up. But that would have been something that there would have been more communication about had it not been stuck. So I think, and were you able to see, Lee, the articles and things that are online?
I haven't looked at the articles. Now, when I get the TREIC Insider, I get those. But I'm just not getting the Inspector Insider. I'm getting everything on the real estate side, just not on the Inspector Insider.
I'm not really sure why that would be happening. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Me either, that's why I brought it up.
Yeah, because it's your emails in there and it says you're getting them. So And I looked at your other email too, because you mentioned you got a separate one. That one we have in our system, but it's not subscribed to any topics. So you shouldn't be getting anything at that one. And that's what that data shows too.
Yeah, no, I still get the track insider to that one.
Yeah, and that one comes to the primary one for your inspector. So, so yeah, it sounds like, I mean, to me, this sounds like a technical issue that I can't really solve for. If there's something else.
Well, let's just see when it, we come out this, I mean, that's when you started about the same time I became chair. We talked a bunch about how you were gonna start pushing stuff out socially and stuff and try to change up some communications. I know you've been reporting to commissioners about different things and open rates and all that. So we get together after every meeting and go through a summary. This is what I have, this is on my list, and then you push it out. So let's just figure out when it's going out, and then I'll communicate to everybody, and we'll just see if it's getting caught that time out.
Yeah, and I would say as far as from a communications perspective, what we're doing is working, is what the data show me. And that people are opening it, they're clicking on things, they're reading stuff. I mean, I even have visits to the articles, the number of views of a page, and they're pretty good. So across the board through the different metrics we have available, it seems to me that people are finding it, so.
Okay. All right, we'll see if there's some contact that we can figure out what else is going on here or something.
Yeah, I'll put in a ticket with Granicus and see if they can shed some light on it.
Okay.
Cool, thank you.
All right.
Sean, Dave Molly's going, just so you know.
Okay, perfect. All right, Tony, did you have anything else for the executive decision?
No, I mean, we're gonna talk about legislative items on a separate agenda item. I would have provided an update on that, but we'll do that under that item.
Sean, do you want to circle, since Dave's here, do you want to circle back to number 2 and entertain a motion to excuse if anyone wants to do that?
Just for Keisha?
For Keisha, yeah.
Does anybody want to, you make a motion? Okay, all in favor?
So that was a motion by
Scott.
Aye.
All right, B, track enforcement, Mike?
I'll just let you know, Tony's gonna be taking over the presentation as the liaison, but I did want to do a quick introduction. We did hire a couple more attorneys recently.
Okay.
Carrie Bruner and Sonia Subash. They're also gonna be handling inspector-related matters.
Yeah.
I think you
Yeah, I talked to
you talked to one of them last week. But Tony's training them, and so that will put 4 attorneys that will be handling inspector-related cases on top of their normal caseload with brokers and sales agents. Which historically, this is the largest amount of attorneys that have shared the caseload for inspector cases. So if there's any issues with that, just please let me know. Email me, call me, but I'll have that to turn over to Tony for the report.
Thank you. Tony Renteria, staff attorney. I'm the liaison for the inspector committee. I just want to comment on our new attorneys. They're coming from the dental board. They do have some experience in their previous job working with the standard of care, which is similar to the standard of practice that we use. So they're picking up pretty quickly the way that inspector rules are enforced. So they're doing a great job. And we did have a case that we consulted with Sean, was it last week? And he was very helpful. We have a list of expert inspectors that help us out whenever there's a difficult issue that we call upon. So we appreciate that. The enforcement disciplinary report, it overlaps from last fiscal year. There's 2 cases from July 18th, July 28th, and there's 2 additional cases from September 26th. And if you reviewed the orders and have any questions, I'm certainly able to answer any questions.
Any questions? All right, thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
Education, examination division.
Good morning, everyone. Jennifer Wheeler, Director of Education and Exams. Before I get started, I just want to make sure to introduce Cole Kuljak. to those of you who may or may not have met him before, he's in the back of the room and is monitoring the meeting for CE credit. And as Vanessa said earlier, if you haven't already signed in and you're seeking CE credit, make sure to touch base with Cole. And then moving on to the reports, the education reports are included in your materials. I'm just going to kind of summarize. In fiscal year 2022, we approved 26 inspector qualifying courses and 183 ICE courses. Currently, we have 286 inspector CE elective courses approved and 19 legal ethics and SOP courses that are approved in multiple delivery methods across the board. And again, I'm just kind of high leveling this. The other thing that I wanted to let you know about is that we've requested volunteers to participate in the new legal ethics SOP review writing group. And we have received 5 volunteers, which is about exactly what we would like to have. We plan to begin meeting and writing in January. And as always, this committee will see a draft version and a final product based on your feedback. You have the opportunity to provide feedback before anything is brought before the commission for approval. So we're going to start hitting that pretty hard in January. If there are any specific questions about any of the materials in the report, the education report, I'm happy to answer those. But other than that, that concludes my education report.
All right. Anybody have any questions for Jen? Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Licensing Division, Denise.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Denise Sample, Director of Licensing. And so we've got reports that this now includes the full fiscal year 22 data that ended in August. So I can point your attention to the bottom left corner with the year-to-date comparison of inspector applications received. If you recall, fiscal year 21 was when we had the record number of applications that came in ahead of the requirements changing. So we kind of monitored that number compared to fiscal year 20. And we received, in the full fiscal year 20, 575 professional inspector applications compared to 744 for fiscal year 22. So we're still ahead. And so fiscal year 21 just continues to be kind of that outlier year with, that usual pattern. When requirements change, we get a very large influx of applications that come in ahead of the change. We're also ahead of fiscal year 20, with applications received for real estate inspector. We ended fiscal year 22 with 26, actually, the same number, 26 for fiscal year 20 and 26 for fiscal year 22. With apprentice applications, we ended fiscal year 20 with 82 applications compared to 92. So we've kind of been comparing it to and ignoring fiscal year 21, which was the outlier year. That next page, if you look on the right-hand side, that shows the licensing renewal activity, and we've noticed an increase in the renewal rate for inspector licenses across all the license types, or all the ranks, pardon me. So if you'll notice, this is comparing fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 22, because we are on a 2-year renewal cycle for those licenses. Anecdotally, what might be contributing to that is that we're now approaching a year since continuing education providers have begun posting continuing education credit for inspectors electronically, the way they've done for many years on the real estate side. So that's likely a contributing factor, but we'll continue comparing that. The next page shows license holder counts. This report is a little bit different from the last time we presented it. There was input at the last committee meeting about the breaking out active license holder counts. So you'll notice additional rows added there. So with inspectors, we ended fiscal year 22 with 4,956 total licensed inspectors, and 4,331 of those were active. The next page breaks down in a graph form the inspectors, which are in yellow, the top right of that page. And you'll see the overall license holder count has continued to increase over the last 13 months. And the last report is licensing application processing times. And so if you hone in on professional and real estate and apprentice inspectors, right in the center of each of those tables, we are maintaining, we're staying within our threshold or our goal of 14 days to process those applications. As I reported previously, we've continued with cross-training, and so we are no longer in the days of there's only 2 people who know how to process inspector applications. We now have a solid team of staff available to work those. And with that, that concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Denise, do you know how many active apprentice inspectors there are? I can find
I don't have that breakdown available. I can definitely pull that. Is that something you'd like to see? Is the breakdown by rank?
No, not everybody. We're just gonna have some discussion today about apprentice inspectors.
Yeah,
I was just trying to figure out how many we have.
Yeah, if that is for a future agenda item, I just need about 5 minutes and I can get those numbers for you.
Okay. Yes, please.
All right, will do.
All right, any other questions for Denise? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item number 9, discussion and possible action regarding walk and talk inspections. I believe we saw an email.
Yeah, this was the email that was provided to, I think, all of you prior to last meeting. It wasn't on the agenda, so this was added to this agenda so you guys could discuss what this person's concerns or comments were about the what was put on the website in terms of walk and talk inspections. To boil it down, his issue was that it's not defined, and this doesn't meet the definition of an inspection, so the SOP should apply. I think the part that's ignored there is if it's part of a real estate transaction, an inspection is required.
Right.
And then it's defined as to what that is.
Anytime we're dealing with the public and it deals with a transaction of a house that's under contract or going to be under contract, then it is required to be an inspection report. No ifs and buts. This is something all of us have got phone calls, emails, and everything else on. I appreciate the wording that went out. It was very clear and informative. People are like, well, I'm doing it as a consultant. I said, then you're wrong. So then you need to turn yourself into track.
Yeah,
Well, they asked me to come look at a couple items, and there's a company out there, we brought it in.
Yeah.
Pick one of the 5 and we'll give you a discount. I'm like, then it needs to be on the 7-6.
Right. Yeah, that's
I
what
mean,
I'm
for
saying.
an example, we're gonna go over something about one single item here in a minute that's gonna help this as well, but I feel with everybody else, I think this was perfect wording. There is no misrepresentation or misleading.
Right.
It's, if there is a consumer and a house that's under the transaction, it doesn't even have to have a for sale by owner or anything else. It still goes to the title company, and under the state law, it actually is a TREIC transaction.
And this email kind of hangs his hat on the basic performance. You have to do this and the basic performance. Well, you turn on the light, you turn on the AC, you test the, is there hot water coming out of the faucet? That could be construed as basic performance.
On a structural item of the home that says it may be delinquent in any way, then it's required to be a TREIC report.
Well, what the email's hanging on is it's a limited visual survey and basic performance evaluation.
Performance, you operated something.
But you operated something, that's kind of my thing. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's.
that's my opinion, I'm sorry, I just wanted it out there.
What's to stop somebody from hiring a contractor, a friend who knows construction?
That's fine, but they're not a TREIC
They're not-
inspector.
I realize
Which
that.
means that's not a requirement or anything in. You can hire, I mean, you can hire my son to go out and look at a house that has years of experience in construction and tell you things that are wrong. That's a contractor. But an inspector, under having a license, under the commission laws, is if you do anything that deals with the consumer and the transaction of anything that deals with the selling of a home, and they're single or one, whatever, but that's required to be a report.
I just want to clarify something with you guys with enforcement. I mean, if it's a sales transaction or subject to a transaction, don't you have to be, if you're going in and walking through, you have to be licensed to do that?
Or a buyer seller.
Yeah.
Or
That's
participation there.
That's why I wanted
How
to.
does
It would be unlicensed activity.
That would be unlicensed activity.
Yes. Unless you have a separate license, like an engineer or something like that, what is a good example?
HVAC or special
Yeah.
license.
Go look at
As long,
that.
as long as they're not looking at the, some other function that they're
Yeah.
not licensed to do.
And it doesn't preclude somebody from having a contractor come in and say, hey, I'm about to do this, I'm about to buy this house and rehab it and gut it. I want somebody to come through and give me an estimate.
Well,
Let's do
yeah,
that.
that's
different, but yeah, I'm
If
talking
it's
a-
just talking about the, yeah, talking about the
Conditions.
addition of the house base on the sale, then that would be a license activity.
Because,
I mean, I hear that happen pretty regularly, somebody hired, or not hired.
Oh, there's
Their
advertising out
dad
there.
comes in,
Yeah.
some
Well,
friends who look at it.
that's different, if they're
Is
not
what
paid,
they're
if they're
not
not paid, that's a separate thing, if there's not a transaction where they're paid for it, but if they're paid for it, then that is, then they've gotta be licensed inspector to do it for real estate transactions.
So I think from what we're saying, that was clear in the SOPs, it's clear with TREIC.
It was clear in the email that went out.
Well, and I just wanna, because one of the things we were gonna do is some additional, if I'm wrong, we were gonna do some additional, messaging on it, and we
Okay.
held off on it because we wanted to make sure
Okay.
everything was okay with this, so.
All right, can you send that?
Great. Yeah,
Can
of
you send
course.
that to us before this week?
Yeah, sure. It was like social media posts and I think I was gonna do a separate article on it.
I think so, we just kind of paused.
Yeah.
because we wanted
So
to make sure.
the
that-
triggers are kind of like your license by TREIC. And it's
Actually, the
all-
trigger is it's part of a sales transaction.
Right.
You're getting paid
One
for
of
evaluating the
family,
property that's subject
There's
to
a
a sales.
consumer,
I
and
thought
there's
we
a
had talked
special
once
house.
before that payment isn't necessarily a trigger.
Well,
If I do it for free, I still gotta follow.
it says employed, so,
Yeah, employed, not necessarily compensated.
yeah.
Well,
So
it's
you hired
still
them.
applies.
I come to do your house because you're getting ready to sell it, but I don't charge you anything. It's still a home inspection.
I don't know, employed to me seems like there's gotta be some sort of transactional thing.
It's gotta be compensation.
I think
Well,
so.
but what if it was done pro bono? Would still apply. If I do it for charity, I'm still supposed to be subject to the rules. So I don't think it requires that money be exchanged.
Employment's more of an agreement that I'm going to do it, this is what you're gonna get.
I mean, I don't think we have a bunch of people running around doing these things for free anyways. I think
I
think
saw
people
that
are
for
trying to
175.
stretch the rules so they can, when we add a busy market, people can do walk and talk inspections for $100 or something like that. and do
Because
10
some
a day.
I know we're kind of doing the walk and talk when buyers were not sure if they were gonna buy a
Yeah.
house, and after the walk and talk, they decide, okay, I'll get a home inspection. Well, if the walk and talk went bad, then I wouldn't get a home inspection.
But that's still, I
That's-
believe the rules contemplate a prospective buyer, so that even if they're not,
Even the anticipation of it, so like pre-home inspection before you list it.
Yeah.
That needs to have an inspector
Absolutely.
as well, so.
So I think just continuing more communication to come out. I think we're good as far
I
as.
think everybody's on the same
It was
page.
just something that overflowed from other states.
I
So
mean,
we'll,
it's slowing down, so they should slow down.
we'll make sure that you guys look, you requested to see that stuff, but yeah, we just put a pause on it.
Okay.
Just based on this discussion, but it seems like we can move forward with it.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Item 10, discussion and possible action regarding instruction sheet for inspection report.
Okay, this is me. I'm gonna share my screen with all of you. So at the last meeting, there was some discussion about the check boxes and we were working on a rule and everything. And it was brought up that we could come up with an instruction form that wouldn't be mandatory. We would put it on the website, we would message people, the inspectors could download it. Consumers could download it to have some idea of how the report form should be filled out. It's to try to provide some consistency in how all of this is interpreted. And so the SOP committee, subcommittee met this morning and looked at it, and this is, the report in front of you is based on their recommendations. So, can everybody see that okay? Essentially, it addresses the rule 535.223, and then it talks about the check boxes, which are inspected, not present, and deficient. And then it says that you must, in addition to checking the boxes, you must explain your findings, because I think maybe it was you, Sean, or maybe Scott, that said guys are checking the boxes and not putting anything in the report.
Checking not inspected.
Yeah.
And it actually states in there, our report information, and you check non-inspected, you have to clarify
Yeah,
why
right.
you didn't inspect it, or what was caused the condition not to be inspected.
The departure provision.
Right.
Yes.
So that says that in there, and then it says when is a particular box appropriate, so we go through that. Inspected, this box should be checked when a portion or component is inspected. Not inspected, there are 3 bullets. Checked if it's present, not inspected, should be present, but is not, and as a result, could not be inspected, or when the system or component is present but cannot be fully inspected due to existing conditions or limitations, so that's not inspected. Not present, this box should be checked when a component or system is not present in the dwelling. And then deficient, must be checked when a component or system exhibits a deficiency as defined, and we mentioned the standards of practice. And we also put the definition on there as well. So that's all that. And then can an inspector check multiple boxes for a particular component or system? This says yes, and explains like when that's appropriate. You know, inspected deficient is, you know, if you're inspecting it, it's deficient. Not present, not inspected, you can check both of those boxes and explain what's there. And so essentially, if the committee, and then the final thing we addressed is there's the rule, and this would be based, this change would be based on when this rule is adopted. But right now, there's the rule changed to 223, which would require an inspection report form for a single item inspection. And so the committee asked us to include on this instruction how you would fill that out. Essentially, it's very simple. You check not inspected for all the items you're not inspecting, and you cannot, and we put this in bold, this was an addition from the SOP subcommittee, do not delete any required sections from the report. Because people are doing that. So,
Well, what the intent is, you just put not inspected, client, stated that.
yeah, it says not inspected and say it with the result of the single inspection, the single item inspection, or something like that. So this is just to provide some guidance, some consistency. Again, it's not a mandatory form. It'll be on the website. We'll also do some messaging.
It's an informational thing that answers the questions that came back around due to something that happened.
Just a form FAQ, basically.
Yes.
And so this, like I said, this last item would not be added, and we could either add the instruction without that last item and then wait for that rule to be adopted and then add it as it's amended at that time, or just wait for that rule and put it on the calculator. That's what we could do.
The sooner you get the information out, I mean, the more people, I'll just leave that off until it gets approved and then add it after.
Yeah.
So are we all good with this?
Yeah. We need to vote on this or anything, Tony?
Yeah, just whether you approved it, it gets moved forward.
Entertain a motion.
It's mine, so you gotta.
Would you like?
Go for it.
So moved.
I'll second, I guess.
Motion by Lee, second by Scott. Anybody in favor?
People online, are you guys okay with this?
Anybody?
Yeah. Everybody's online, good?
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Tony. Scott? All right. Item 12. What was that? Item 11, discussion possible action regarding standard inspection report form. Tony and Scott. Yeah.
You want to take this, Scott? I'm happy to if you want.
We can bring it up.
Yeah, Amber's putting it up there. We had this,
You can start now, Ed.
well, yeah, but if you guys recall at the last meeting, Roy Carter raised an issue with the exception to building, using the inspection report for building inspections and phase inspections and wanted to, can you scroll down, Amber, to the highlighted portion, or not, that? Yeah. So this section here on D.
Go back up just a little bit.
Yeah.
Start right there.
So, 6 says this doesn't apply to the following, and the last time we took out the single item inspection, so the inspection report would apply to single item inspections. Roy brought up the inspections for builders and phase inspections and whether or not that should also be removed, and Scott, I'll let you speak to that.
Well, it says what inspectors are not required to do, and to clarify any questions, is Steve and I, we've done, a lot of us, we do bank inspections, we do phase inspections, we do city inspections. Steve has contracts, I have contracts. So we went through the wording and put it back in there. but we outlined it completely what doesn't need a report. Then the second part is a report is not intended to be a subtitle of the inspection. That was actually what Roy wanted to bring into it. The second half of this.
The report is intended to be a substitute?
Yes, for an inspection of the property of the inspector of the buyer's choice. That goes back to saying, you know, you have builders that are one-time builders that are selling a house, and they would call somebody and say they hire you to come in and they give you a sheet, and they say, these are the items I want you to inspect. You're doing it for the builder, not for the consumer. The builder's doing it as, how would you say you do it too? A punch list inspection, quality control. So that's where the wording that came back in, look at the wording that was actually there before. It's a little bit more, but this actually clarifies straight down to more towards construction and code inspections, because we're not code inspectors.
So it's essentially the bill that was, or the rule that was drafted last meeting, the subcommittee just moved to move that forward the way it was. So leave this in, have the addition about the check boxes that's in blue, and have this part stricken about the single item inspection, and just leave it as it was proposed last meeting.
So any questions?
The part, I guess I've had a question before is, if it's on a substantially complete home,
Yeah,
phase inspections are out of the
automatically,
scope automatically,
yeah.
right? Why do we have to address them specifically? Is that just for
Well, 'cause
confirmation?
technically, you can call part of like the final inspection of a phase
Right.
inspection
Yes.
is a substantially complete.
And that's kind of, if you're doing phase inspections, the only one that might be in conflict would be the final.
But you're doing the same thing I do, is I'm a contractor with the builder, and I'm hired to go in for the builder and do their final inspections for them to get their COs. That's what that is saying as well, isn't it? But if you have a consumer that's involved in the purchase of the house, and you're doing it against the builder or any type of construction, then you have to go back to doing it.
Yeah, like if I'm doing the phase inspection throughout the process and doing multiples, I'm sending just like a Word doc
Yeah.
all up until that house is done. When it's done, then I warn them, hey, by the way, the report that you'll get on this one is completely different because it's a promulgated form, because it's a substantially completed house now.
The last part of this, we have to put notice on the reports that we're using our own report on our phase.
That was what was brought up to us about information to the consumer, is your advertisement, your information, and your website, all that says, your vehicle says a TREIC number on it. So the misrepresentation could be there at that point.
So put the notice on there is just.
That this is not a TREIC report.
I mean, it's the footer of mine,
Yeah.
like my word.
That's the trigger on whether or not it doesn't have to be the promulgated form.
Right.
The notice, if the notice is applied, you generally form, if it's not, then this carve-out doesn't apply and it has to be the promulgated form.
Okay.
So on the phase inspection, that first sentence, this report is prepared for the builder or other entity in accordance with the builder's requirements. That's gonna have nothing to do with the consumer.
But it actually says the inspector does not have to do a report for the following. Like, we don't have to do a 7-600 reinspection.
Yeah.
It is, and we're just trying to bring everything back together and clarify more of.
Because I've never put that statement on any of my phase inspections because the house wasn't substantially complete, so.
Yeah.
I just trigger wasn't there.
I just left it as the footer on my document.
Because it's not a substantially completed house, you shouldn't need that statement.
Sometimes it is.
But that helps you as, if anybody goes back, you can say, you know, or if it ends up over enforcement, they automatically go, well, it said right there, it's not a report.
But the pictures attached with it show open walls.
I understand that, but the amount of, this as well as I can without being mean, is the amount of less education of people that we're dealing with, and having to go through stuff, I see that not informative of a simple item causes bigger problems.
So if we're doing, X, Y, Z builder, we need to put the notice somewhere on the document we produce for the builder.
That's required now. You could take the notice out if that was the issue with Roy, as Scott said, but the recommendation.
I'm going by what Roy, I've had communication on, and then I'm going the same thing with Steve is, I've always done it because I have a TREIC license, air conditioning, plumbing license. And every time I do anything that's not in line with the rules for TDA, I actually have to say that I'm licensed by TDA, that this is not a TDA form. I'm licensed by TDLR, this is not a TDL.
But up until it's finished.
Yeah, the only time that statement, that quoted statement should be made is on a substantially completed house.
Because TREC's really not involved in regulating
Before that.
before that.
Yeah.
It's
But
not
I mean,
happening.
I understand why good.
I mean, if you want to put it in, great, but
That's
there should be
right.
no requirement for that.
So the rule is open. If you guys want to remove the notice, we can still do that. That's not,
Well, I think the rule is.
I think it's clear how it is. The very next one is inspection building is not substantially complete.
Right.
I mean, it's a big part of where the statement's.
Again, I'm not
D is
trying to
being
be
added,
mean, but
right?
this is how it's presented to me.
D's not being
is-
added. D is currently in the rule.
Okay.
Right.
Nothing's.
The
Nothing
question,
has changed.
the question comes down is clarification. It's not for the inspector, it's for the consumer to understand that this is not a TREC report.
In case the builder gives it to the
Yes.
consumer.
I would assume that's why that's there, because I'm guessing that consumers get those.
Prime example, I'll be honest, how many guys in here, every report you do, no matter what you're doing, there's 7 to 10 people that see that report. And everybody reads it differently. Just a small little wording to clarify, to help yourself and any problems.
Like I said, I can say, if you're doing it for the builders, I don't do it for the builders. I do make inspections, stuff like that, but my phase I do for the buyers.
Yes.
So, I mean, they don't care as far as that statement, because I'm sending my report to them. They'll send it to the builder, and the builder may call me and ask questions, or the builder don't care about it.
You're on the other side.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So this comes down to the other side of people, the guys that do all kinds of phase,
For just
construction, the city and everything
Well,
else.
that's why I was talking about that first sentence of that quote.
Well, here's the other thing, informative. It's in Steve's in my office where we're gonna bring each other in. It's in my contract to the builder. It's in contract with the city. I do a lot of VA, pre and post inspection, and it's in my paperwork saying this will not be a TREC inspection. It will be an inspection report based off the findings of, so it's actually, all I have to do is inform them one way or another. It doesn't have to be on the report, it can be in your contract agreement, whatever. It just comes down to eliminating the possibility, because when you have a license number and they see it, they see dollar numbers.
So you,
So the recommendation is to remove all the.
D kind of, the recommendation as well.
No, the recommendation from the subcommittee was to propose the rule as it was presented last meeting, which was with this intact,
Right.
the blue added and the red
red
stricken.
stricken.
Yes, sir.
So we are effectively requiring the notice on the,
It's currently required, that wouldn't change any requirement as it's currently drafted. That language that's highlighted is not new language.
And that's not, the catch is that verbiage is not required for a consumer. That verbiage is required when you're doing an inspection for a city or a builder or whatnot.
I have.
Builder or
I
other
have-
entity.
It's not on my contract with the cities.
No, they have their own contract.
No, well,
I still think if it's not substantially complete, this is a moot point, but.
it's only when I go do that final inspection. 99% of mine don't go to the consumer buyer. Builder keeps them, city keeps them, DA keeps them, consumer never sees them. That's probably what
I'm fine with the way this.
That's what.
It's just, as it's written to be as for the builder or city or municipality, so not for the consumers.
Okay.
So the question is, do you leave it or keep it? I'm leave it or.
I'm fine with leaving it, because it's specific to builder or other entity, not a consumer, so.
So we're still allowing on the re-inspections just to do your own form. That's what A would say, right?
Yes, it's always been that way.
Yeah, I know.
This has always been there, it was removed, and now it's.
Right.
Let's not remove it, keep it there. Put it back the way it was.
We vote on this?
Yeah, we need a vote. So, again, I just want to clarify, the motion or the recommendation from the subcommittee was to propose the rule as you see right here.
To add the blue, leave the yellow,
Yeah.
take out the red.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Any other discussions on that? Y'all, all right, someone want to make a motion?
Hold on, do it, any hands, any?
I don't see any, I don't see.
I'll make a motion to approve the changes as presented.
All right.
Second that.
Steve made the motion, Lee seconded it. Any discussion on it? All right, all in favor?
Everybody on the call good?
Aye.
Thank you.
Any opposed?
I heard a grunt.
Okay. All right. Item number 12, discuss the possible action regarding terminating inspector sponsorship form. So this is me and Denise. So in the past, when I've gone to remove apprentice inspectors underneath my professional license, or real estate inspectors, I've had conflicting messages coming from TREIC on how to properly do that. And so Denise and I got on the phone and basically just, the brokers have a form, so she just developed this form so that the sponsoring inspector. So you want to talk about it at all, Denise?
Yeah, I wanted to add, I think it was just one of those things where it doesn't come up often. Apprentice inspectors don't generally change sponsors as often as sales agents change brokers. So we did mirror this form off of the existing form for brokers to terminate sales agents. So we can make any edits that, you as the committee might decide we need to make to the form.
Yeah, it looks good to me.
I like it.
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't know what to do with the last.
yeah, I mean, I always email TREIC or whatever and say this guy's no longer my license or whatever.
I think I can check if they're still there on the EBS.
Yeah, I know.
They're not their apprentice because they're somebody else's DBA. So my question on this form is this going to remove them under the DBA at the same time? Because the DBA, and that's the one thing that I found, and I still have it right now, is I have an inspector I removed 2 years ago, and his DBA still says my company.
And that DBA is listed on the apprentice's license record?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. What we can do.
Say to remove them from your sponsorship or your company and remove DBA. Have the DBA removed from their name as well.
And that is something that we can do procedurally when we receive these forms going forward. I wasn't aware that wasn't happening or that was an issue. Likely what the only question that I'm thinking of here on the spot is we may need to add a spot for a DBA because it may not be clear that the DBA belongs to you as the sponsor or which one we need to remove.
Yeah, that's something I hadn't thought about, the DBA.
So when I have an apprentice and he finishes the program and he goes and gets licensed as an inspector, do I need to put in to remove him as an apprentice?
No, this is a termination.
Well, I mean, I've still got people that got their license years ago and they're still listed as an apprentice. And he got a license, so he's on my list of inspectors a few times.
That should not be occurring because with inspectors, the apprentice and real estate and professional are all ranks. Not to get too technical, they're all ranks within the same license type in the system. So when someone upgrades, that should be handled, to remove any of those connections, especially once someone upgrades to a professional inspector. But if you can give me some examples.
I've got 1, 2, 3.
Look up his license, you'll see
I've got
there's 3 of
6
them.
apprentices listed under my name, and one of them has a real estate, a couple have professional for years. And I didn't know that's why I was waiting for this form so I could take them off as a sponsor.
They still work.
2 of them.
Well, you still sponsor the real estate inspector, that's right.
Yeah, but I've got professional inspectors listed here. They've been professional on their own license.
Yeah, because Joe's professional.
That sounds like more a housekeeping thing for
Yeah.
licensing to take care of.
I mean,
I don't know if we can address that on the
I was gonna
floor.
ask if I need to use this new form.
It sounds like you don't, it sounds like that should have been taken care of, so we'll look into that and figure out what's.
I mean, there might be an ability to use this form. So Denise, do you think we should add DBA section onto this form?
I think that might be helpful if you as professional inspectors are seeing that the DBAs linger on. It would be helpful because if there's more than one, it may not be completely evident that this specific DBA belongs to the professional that's no longer going to sponsor that apprentice.
I think it is a checkbox, also remove any DBAs
We
or.
probably need to specify the name of DBA that needs to come off.
It might not be clear.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so it probably needs to be a line or something like that.
Right, Denise, it'd be a line because you wanna know exactly what to remove.
Correct. Correct.
And then
And this form for the materials is not fillable, but it will be fillable once it's live on our website.
All right, so we'll revise that and bring it to the next committee. I think it's good. I
We
think it's
don't, I don't
good.
think we need to bring it to
No?
the next committee. If you guys are good with that, we can revise it, and
Okay.
propose that in November to the commission.
Perfect. It's fine. Perfect, let's do that.
Okay, so,
Get the form going.
I approve.
so you wanna do a motion and a,
I make a motion to approve the form as modified.
A second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Perfect. All right, 13, discussion possible action regarding legislation items. Tony and Chelsea?
The fun stuff.
Yeah, so, as Chelsea mentioned, the session is right around the corner. These are two bills that this committee, and it was pretty much just makeup of the committee, approved last time to move forward, and they got the
What do you mean
bill,
last time, last session?
yeah, just prior to last session, I was about to say, they got all the way up to the Senate, and then they died in committee. They didn't even they got assigned to the committee, but didn't get care of it. Last session was a little wonky in terms of a lot of bills. It wasn't for any reason other than they just, didn't get counted right at the right time. So there's been a couple of adjustments. I'll talk about the easiest one first. So I'm going to share my screen.
I didn't mean to attack you. Actually, more than anything,
Yes, we
meaning
appreciate it.
we've had these conversations in the previous committee meetings between last
Yes,
sessions.
sorry. So there are two bills. One of them is to repeal the inspector recovery fund, and the rationale behind that is that inspectors are required to carry liability insurance. And so the fund, while we're still collecting $10 from every new inspector that applies, the fund hasn't been, or is underutilized, and we haven't paid a claim on it since 2017. Most consumers are going through the insurance to get made whole, and they're not coming to us for payment on the recovery fund. So the one adjustment to the bill that was filed last session is we've had a lot of internal discussions about, if you recall, the way the bill was structured previously was there was going to be set aside money to pay any outstanding claims. Once that was out of the way, then there was going to be a refund issue to every eligible inspector who is an inspector who's determined to have been licensed as of a certain date. Internally, we started talking about that, and the cost is really cost prohibitive to issue that many $10 refunds to, whatever, 4,000 inspectors. So the bill that we would like to draft moving forward would instead provide a credit, $10 credit on renewal to every eligible inspector. That's a lot more manageable.
Oh, I like that.
So that's really the only change outside of moving the dates forward. So the date, because this is a session, bump to session forward, all of those days get moved forward. So the final credit would be issued in 2028 on that. So it's, the reason why is you want to make sure, if there are any outstanding, claims, you want to make sure the fund is doing what it's supposed to do. And so we can't issue credits to people until the fund's been But if this bill were to go forward and get, and pass, then as of September 1st of next year, new applicants would no longer have to pay into the fund, and we would start the process of moving, of getting the funds taken care of, so.
Steve, you don't get it to the 14th year.
I gotta renew 3 more times.
So, anyway, we have talked to a couple of sponsors, we have people that are willing to, carry the bill, as is currently drafted. We just wanted, before we obviously sent anything over to them, we wanted to make sure the committee was good with, that minor change to, from refunding credit. It sounds like at least the people at the table are.
I think everybody's probably gonna be fine with it. It'll cost TREIC more to print checks out, mail them out, and do all other junk. It's just.
And they're gonna go to the wrong address. You have a lot of money that's gonna sit on back to you.
Does anybody, before I move on to the next bill, does anybody have any questions online about the recovery fund bill?
In that time or currently, can somebody still put a claim in?
Yeah, so we'll set aside, there's a provision in the bill to determine the outstanding liability of the fund, and then set that money aside, and then once all of that has been determined, then the credit will start. So yes, people can still, I think up until 2020.
Yeah, we have a kind of a deadline where we have to cut it off so that we can determine liability to pay out, but yes.
I didn't know, yeah, it's still, I mean,
It's like, what, 4 years you have up to file that against the recovery.
It's
2 years from the date of filing.
It's 2 years based on, the date the cause of action accrues.
Gotcha.
So we have to kind of calculate that, keep it open for that time period, and then, after that, we could credit.
Right. So, all right, well, thank you, everybody. Okay, now, moving to the next bill. Yes, okay. So this is the other bill that was filed last session that got the approval of the committee and the commission was to get rid of the middle tier license, real estate inspector license. Texas is currently the only state that has a multiple tier license system. And as drafted, there would still be 2 pathways, because the committee still felt it was important to have an apprenticeship, have that available. So you can still get licensed as an apprentice and work as an apprentice inspector towards a professional inspector license, or you go the substitute experience route. This bill just carves out all of that middle tier stuff. Before, so a couple of items. One is staff wants to make sure that we can get input from the inspector committee on how many real estate inspections should be required of an apprentice under direct supervision. Because right now there's only 25 before you get licensed as a real estate inspector. If you just took what's in this current statute and moved it over, that'd be 175 inspections under direct supervision. So that seems a little burdensome on both the apprentice and the supervisor. And so we're trying to get some feedback from all of you on what that number of inspections under direct supervision, what that number should be.
Well, here's my concern with if we go down to the 2 license types, apprentice and professional. As it stands, to be an apprentice, you file the application, you pay the fee, you go through the background check, you're an apprentice. There's no education requirements to be an apprentice, correct?
Correct.
So if we're going to just 2 license types, apprentice and professional, and there's some outliers that are apprentices that are doing inspections on their own, and you have to deal with that in and of itself. But I have a hard time with somebody being an apprentice inspector going through and having 0 education, like not having gone through the Texas standards, at the very least to know what the SOPs are before they start going in and doing inspections, even as an apprentice and whatnot. I'm not saying have 500 hours, for somebody to be an apprentice, but I think at least a base knowledge.
Well, in an apprentice, to move up from apprentice to professional, you actually have to go to school to get your professional license. So apprentices, you bring them in to see if they're even capable of doing something. Before you put them on the ground with you, they have to have a track number.
And you're assuming that that professional that's sponsoring them is gonna give them the correct information as far as Texas standards are concerned.
I understand it,
Always been that way.
but before they can even, so before they can even apply to be a professional inspector, that's where the number of inspections come out, which is, it's 25.
And they would have to take education as well, so what
They have
we're
to do the
talking
whole
about is whether or not there's a reason to have qualifying education before you're even licensed as an apprentice. And I know that there are other apprenticeships in Texas, and none of them have an education requirement.
There's no requirement.
That's
There's
the starting line at the race right there. But the question is getting, if we're looking at dropping that middle tier.
Right. I mean.
That first tier had 25 inspections,
Before it goes real
90 hours, and then if you jumped it to the second tier, or you went to second tier, you'd end up with 200, another 175. So if we're getting rid of them, where do we blend that? Do we keep it, if you go the apprentice path and you're requiring 200 inspections?
Before they
you're
can start
probably-
school.
Yeah, no, you can do school simultaneously.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying now.
But the question is, if we keep it ultimately 200 inspections on the apprentice path, my thought is not many people are gonna take that because they can go to school for an extra month or so and have no
So
inspections.
that's another thing to in consideration, and Brian, I'll get to you in just a second, I just wanna say this, that there's another consideration as to whether or not that I know there's two pathways, but to the extent that this committee's always talked about hands-on experience, do you make the inspector, the apprentice one, more of an attractive pathway to get the license, you know,
I've always thought it would be, we can't mandate it.
Right.
And we inserted a pseudo apprenticing into school so that at least they graduate and have done an inspection, not, not one.
But I'm just speaking to your point about 200 inspections, would that be considered burdensome to both the sponsor
I
and the
think
inspector?
200
It's a
direct,
huge amount of hours.
well, 200 directly supervised is probably way over.
Yeah.
We wanted, Brian, go ahead, sorry about that.
Well, to the comment that was made, I mean, my wife is an LPC and she's got to have like over 1,000 hours of directly supervised work, and she has to pay her supervisor for the privilege of being supervised. I don't think that's unreasonable at all, to have a high number of hours. I mean, this is a significant thing, and we're trying to protect the public with this. As a public at large member, I want to know that if somebody goes through the apprenticeship, they have been directly supervised. They didn't just check the box because they thought it was easier, and they did, 40, or whatever. And I also thought the point was well taken that the apprentice needs to know the basic standards before we turn them loose. Those all need to be addressed, in the process.
We're not turning them loose.
You're not turning them loose. I'm not, and
They're being directly supervised
And-
in everything they do.
And Brian, they do have to take continuing education, so they do take, every 2 years, they do take an SOP course. It's just the question about whether or not they need to have qualifying education before they're even licensed as an apprentice, was brought up.
But that's my point. Like, my wife is an LPC. Before she could even be an apprentice, she had to have substantial training, from the state licensure board. And so I do think it's important that they have some level of basic training, even if it's only a 40-hour course or whatever the commission thinks is appropriate, but they've got to have some type of basic training before they start as an apprentice.
Problem is we're gonna shut down the apprentice altogether, because now it's just easier to go pay champions to be a professional, and you come out of there less trained, less qualified than the guys that are going through the apprenticeship.
But I think that also may need to be adjusted. I think that's my point, is that
ability to do inspections.
Can I ask what y'all think about it being a barrier to entry? Right now, you pay a fee, you get a license, and then you work directly with someone, right? Meaning, you like an LPC example, you counsel separately, but you consult, right? I mean, it's not a direct supervision. This requires direct supervision, so in lockstep,
They
right?
can't go to the house without us.
So essentially, you're getting experience, but not having to pay for the education because you're getting online. I'm wondering if you make a change requiring the education, if you're cutting out a demographic or a type of person who may find it difficult to fund that education on the front end. Does that make sense?
Well, it costs money to start any business. It costs money to get in any profession. I mean, any way, shape, or form. Now, I'm not saying, again, not saying $500 to be an apprentice, but I think at the bare minimum, if you want to be an apprentice, you should at least have that 8-hour legal SOP course, or, to go over the standards, to know what they are, to know exactly what the rules are, not necessarily what your sponsor is going to teach you, to know exactly what the rules are from TREIC before you ever walk into a house. I don't think that's overly burdensome to have even if an 8-hour requirement.
Supposed to be doing it.
Yeah.
Yes, supposed to be, that's all fine and dandy.
How did each of you become professional inspectors? Like
what's-
through the apprentice or
No,
through school?
Straight through school.
Apprentice.
I went through an apprentice.
I mean, we're looking at what, 2%, 3% of all inspectors are either apprentice.
Well, there's-
The problem is usually finding a sponsor. I mean,
Yeah.
I get calls weekly from people looking for somebody to sponsor. And if I can fit them in, yeah, usually it's geographical. I think a lot of the potential inspectors that are looking for sponsors, they said 99% of the calls, the sponsor, even though they're qualified or they used to be on the list, they don't do it because they know they're training a competitor or whatever, so they don't get involved in it. And it's time, a 3-hour inspection turns to 6 hours because you're explaining everything.
Yeah.
And
We got a hand up.
it's a benefit. Every inspector I've ever had would never think about going directly to doing it on their own without having mentored with somebody after having done that. But some people don't even know that experience.
All right, Mike Hamill, Guideline Home Inspections. I do ride along in courses for multiple companies, and just based off of the numbers, if we did the 192 hours for an apprentice, if you took that out and divided it by 8, that's only 24 inspections. And that would be the same amount of hours that they're getting in class. Now, the inspectors that I'm getting coming out of school know nothing.
It's fast tracking.
Yeah.
It's extremely fast tracking, but I mean, when I have guys that are coming to me, or girls even, and they go through their first class and they're like, I just learned more in 4 hours on an inspection from you than I did in my class.
That's all the more reason not to shut down the apprentice.
I think, I don't want to shut it down, at all, and I don't want to shut down, and I would rather people go through the apprentice, and go that route than go the fast track. We can't eliminate that, because that's by statute, we have to have, the option, to fast track through, but I just think at the very least, before they walk into a house, they should at least have, at the bare minimum, an 8-hour course on legal and SOP to know, so that as soon as they start walking in that first house, they can at least have some basis of information to start applying what they're being.
That's where it comes down to, that's where the sponsor, I've done it, I know a lot of guys have done this, and I still have, my son and my wife are both apprentices, and they just help me periodically, you go check this and everything else, we're sitting in there, if you find something, tell me what it is. I've hired a lot of apprentices, and I learned that way and actually went to college instead of, back then you had to go get almost 2,000 hours back then. But Steve, I'm gonna pick on Steve, I've known Steve for a long time and I know he does it the same way. If I'm gonna hire somebody, I don't care you went to school, you're gonna start as an apprentice and you're gonna sit with me for the next 3 to 6 weeks. And at the end of 3 weeks, I determine if you're gonna continue or not. It comes down to who's sponsoring it. It should be the sponsoring of an apprentice, and I do it as I keep a log. And the inspectors are required that you're gonna read this book. And then I'll ask you questions the whole time. It's the sponsoring responsibility.
Because the sponsor's gonna be held, if the apprentice does something wrong, then the sponsor's gonna be held.
Absolutely.
But there's something.
But these are also people that are going into consumers' homes.
Right.
And if they don't have the base knowledge of the SOPs of, I'm supposed to remove this panel, but I'm not supposed to remove this, I'm supposed to do this, not supposed to do that, before they start walking in, we're going into consumers' homes.
If I'm
I
sponsoring.
think they should have at least have a base knowledge of
My
that.
job should teach them.
If I'm
I
sponsoring
understand,
somebody.
and you as a good sponsor would do that, but this isn't about you or what a good sponsor would do. a lot of the rules that go into place are not because people do everything
I mean,
right,
we
it's
don't
because some
have-
Yahoo is doing
I don't-
things wrong.
I don't know if we have very defined rules for sponsors.
We don't.
We just know that.
on the sponsor, not the apprentice.
Why not make that mandatory
The
for
sponsor
sponsors?
is everything. I mean, even my.
The sponsor always take it because it's part of the renewal
The
process.
25
No, I'm talking about for the
inspections,
apprentices.
in my mind,
They
is
have to be able
probably
to
at least
teach their
200 hours
apprentices the SOP.
of.
So help me understand why there's so much pushback on just requiring 1 8-hour course for an apprentice license.
I just think it puts a hurdle up, that if you're hiring somebody, trying to have somebody employed to help you do.
I gotta pay
work,
to watch them do a video when I can teach them more.
You need to get the process started right away. So when you hire them,
Again,
you fill out your
that's
apprentice
one day.
It's
license,
consistency.
and you start training them after the license comes in. But if you have to wait to take court, like when I hire somebody to do pest control, you hire them, you apply for the apprentice license, then you start the training after the license is issued. You start the hours, all the field work,
40
and all that
hours,
stuff
40
like
hours.
that. Yeah. So it's after the license is issued is where the starting line was, like Steven said, and then from that is where you start building upon the training and stuff.
I think if.
If they
back
have
the
to do
original
CE,
question,
if they stay longer than 2 years, they just do CE.
They're two different.
Sorry.
I mean, the question that Tony was asking about the 175 is a different question.
Right.
Right,
So
like
how
what
many-
you're talking about right now, let's put that on the table, because I think
Okay.
that question needs to be answered to the extent this legislation.
How many inspections does an inspector?
But I think the topic that's being raised is, do you want to recommend, it would be a statutory change, do you want to recommend education for the apprentice before they can, as a condition of the apprentice license? Do you
Before
want-
they can actually.
You want to recommend education, which I will say, significant shift, right? That's a significant shift in the apprentice license, it's gonna be a statutory change. It's an increase in requirements, and what, to the extent you're seeing, like why? Why, what problems are you seeing with the system as it is now? I mean, those are the questions you want to flesh out whenever you're doing legislation, right? Like, what is the problem we're trying to fix? Is there data backing that there's an issue? Does the system work? Does it not work?
We don't have any data.
Yeah, moving forward on a legislative change, you want to, as Vanessa said, you want to make sure you have all your ducks in a row, because if we're up there, if this were to go forward, we're up there trying, if somebody asks the question, we're not able to answer that, that's not a good thing.
But that up there says that they're going from an apprentice to go to a professional, it's 175.
That's the way,
different.
that's a
That's a
different, we're not,
I-
we're,
I
I
understand.
think
Let's
we
just
need
decide if
to,
we want to do the.
we need to settle the
education
education
first.
thing first, because I think that has an impact on whether we even move forward with this legislation this
Can
session.
I throw out one other thing, which is, I think you also always wanna, I say this a lot, you always wanna consider everyone who holds the license type, right? So you mentioned, you've got folks that you have that come and help you with things, and like, what does that mean for anyone who's gonna hold that license?
I know a lot of husband and wife teams, and the husband has a professional license, she has an apprentice license.
Or vice versa,
Vice
right?
versa. It's all over the board, I've got them all over.
There you
the board. I just, honestly, yes, but I mean, I'll be honest with you, 90% of them are husband and wife teams, and
Yeah,
that's how it goes.
there's an education
And
component to get to renew the license.
And
It's
our
that
last
initial,
board member, it was her and her son, and then he started as a apprentice and worked himself up to a real estate inspector and never went any further.
Sure.
So,
Shannon Gatewood, is it possible to have it within a certain time period? You get your apprentice license and within 6 months, you have to take, even if it's an abbreviated 4-hour legal ethics and whatever, that the sponsor has to document and send it off, and if that doesn't happen in 6 months, it gets flagged.
Most of them that are in that track are probably going to sign up, get their apprentice license, and simultaneously be doing inspections with the sponsor and going to school to get the academics.
Right.
So it's gonna happen, and usually as quick as they get signed up, as soon as they get their license. And I've had them, and they'll sign up with a school, and they'll be doing it concurrently. There are some apprentices who never have intention of getting their license, they're professional assistants, because they have to have a license to be on the site assisting, whether it's a family member, father, son, the apprentice. There are some apprentices that may have had their license 15, 20 years.
Yeah,
There are apprentices that are apprentices for life.
Professional apprentices,
Yeah.
so they just do the continuing ed. They're not gonna do anything more than, they never go to a house by themselves. They're the shadow.
Well, they're not supposed to.
Well,
But,
we can't stop
That's the end
people
of the
from,
road.
you can't stop people from doing bad
Right,
things.
absolutely,
Like if we legislate our rule make that way, good luck, right?
So the question is do we require them to have education before they can actually walk on the property?
I just think our job here is to protect the consumer, and having somebody go into a house with absolutely zero knowledge of the standards that they're supposed to be adhering to while in that first house is a risk to consumers.
Has it been for in your career, like up until today?
What do you mean?
Like, if it's, like, can you speak to where this has harmed a consumer in your experience in the past? And I'm not trying to challenge as much as try to glean stories out, and so that if we're testifying before the legislature, they say, why are you increasing this requirement? We say, well, we've heard stories about babies. Does that make sense?
I know a husband and wife team where the wife is now an apprentice, and, you know, she got it, but she had no clue as to what those standards were. Now granted, that's a communication issue between, you know, husband and her, but she goes into a house and, you know, like broke something within the first hour. She was there because she just wasn't knowledgeable as far as what was, he told her, go check on this, and assumed that she had the base knowledge for it.
But that would fall back on, you know, professional that would allow her to go in there.
But the consumer could still be harmed. That's kind of my thing. It's just we're letting people into somebody's
It could be
home.
harmed by
It adds some
anybody.
consistency.
Do we want to take a straw poll? Do we want to make a motion and see if it
I
goes
still
forward?
think an 8-hour course is that huge of a hindrance to licensure.
I agree. But now that we have to go through the legislature for anything that's going to make it.
But we have to
hard
do
get a
that.
license.
We're gonna have to provide documentation stating the reason why we're doing it.
Just speaking to what Lee said about going through it anyway, I don't disagree with that. This bill is but this is a bill that we've vetted since the last session. This is something new that's been added that we need to make sure that we've got the data to back up moving forward to it. And Chelsea's question, I think, is a valid one. If we can't show consumer harm, that's gonna fall over there like a lead balloon. Because they're gonna say, why are you increasing the hours without showing any consumer harm on this? It's like legislate just to legislate. I'm not saying that there's not consumer harm.
So we have to wait until there is consumer harm before we go back and change.
No, we have to collect the data,
we need
but
to collect the
there is,
data.
electricians don't require this, plumbers don't require this. I mean, this is outside of the norm. So to explain why something needs to be outside of the norm, it needs to be very specific, and there needs to be a reason for it.
I have a question. This goes to the attorneys. If I brought somebody in that didn't know jack about anything, and they walk in and catch the house on fire, who's responsible?
Well, of course, the sponsor, you know, generally.
That's my whole, I'm sorry. but
I
that's
mean,
what I'm
what
getting.
I'm hearing is that the apprentices going through this route, they're better qualified. I mean, I would generally agree that they seem to handle things, you know, better, more professionally, because they kind of take on what the sponsor does. So if you have a good sponsor that has good systems, good procedures, the apprentice is going to be better qualified. And there is that justification that we need to provide because increasing any education, it is a barrier to the entry to the profession. So I don't see necessarily a problem. There's always going to be issues for all inspectors, including apprentices, but I don't think they're related to a lack of education necessarily, more to a lack of supervision, which is already part of the rule.
I have a question. Okay, so if we don't change the apprentice licensure procedure, but just say the apprentice doesn't enter their first house until they complete this 8 hours, is that?
Depends on the, I mean, I would assume if you're sponsoring somebody, you have a plan on how you're going to, what and how you're gonna do it. Maybe the lack may be a directive to a sponsor.
Oh, first, you're not going on the roof with me. Well, we'll get to that after I see that you get out of line.
Oh, yeah.
Secondly is, your hands are in your pocket, don't touch anything and stand we're at this point behind me, and you're gonna do that for a week.
Tony, that would still be a rule change though, right? If we
Well,
added
if
education
we have the
requirement.
authority to do it by rule, it'd be a rule change, and then again, I'm not trying to sound like Brett Berger, I just want the committee to understand where there are some hurdles
Yeah,
that the governor's office needs
but
to
if we
look
did
at
what
it.
Mike was saying, it would still be a rule
It'd
change.
be a rule change, but the governor's office would then need to look at it and determine whether or not that was something that was a barrier to entry, and they would weigh in on that, so.
So do we want to see if the committee take some kind of vote to see if we want to move forward with this? If we do, then we start collecting the data to build a rule change.
Well, I'm sorry.
If the general census is
But I
not
don't know
to
if we
do
have
it.
the
I don't know that
authority to
we've
do
talked
it,
about what do you mean a rule change?
to require the education post-license.
Or to require education at all.
Well, you can't do the education by rule, that's gotta be by statute.
That's what, yeah, okay, so I think that's the miscommunication here. So, yeah, if you want to have education be a requirement for the apprentice,
Before you
that's
get
gotta,
licensed, that's gotta be a
that's a
statutory change.
But if it's after.
Then we don't know.
We don't know, we have to look at it.
I think you're essentially, you're rule-making some legislation there, right? Because how is that not still a license requirement?
Because they're required to take continuing education
Yeah,
for the renewal. I don't know if there's some.
but if you're gonna say you can't enter a house, you cannot do anything
Okay.
until you take the.
So both of them are statutory.
Right.
Both of them are.
That's an
statutory
oversight.
changes.
Unless you start splitting it up like SAE
Yeah.
and start.
Well, that's
making
even
that.
That's statutory.
I mean, and that's another possibility.
So again, don't want to dissuade you guys, I just want everybody to understand that, I think, and I want to speak, staff we need to get the data together in order to make sure that this is something we felt.
Well, and all I'm trying to do is decide if we even need to get the data.
Right.
Okay.
And I want to add something to that. We're late. If we're going to make this change, then it might be 2 years.
Yeah.
I'm not throwing it out there as a threat as much as we've already had meetings with legislative offices to vet the
This
original
is already
version
2
of
years
this.
past.
Yeah, this was language that was. This was language that was filed last session, went all the way to the Senate. The only thing that we're trying to get some clarification on is the way it was drafted, and this is a good thing, was whether or not 175 hours is, so that was the initial thing, but let's go back to this other issue, so.
So how do we wrap up this other issue?
Well, I think if someone wants to put, a motion forward to recommend, an education component to the apprenticeship, I think this group could vote to make that recommendation. It'd have to go to the commission would have to, agree and get it sort of into that legislative process. There's stakeholder input. I mean, that's the thing, right? So when we talk about starting late, it's October, right? You've got to get all kinds of stakeholder input,
Yeah, because
et cetera. And the reason, I'll just say this, the reason that we're throwing out all these questions that I think people sometimes get frustrated, it sounds like we're always like, barrier to entry, what's the problem? What are you doing here? And that's because this is legislation, this is the law. You never want it, you want it to be so well thought out and researched and everyone that it's gonna impact, because the minute you get legislation that isn't that, you are stuck with it maybe forever, right? Because how hard is it to get a legislative change? It's hard. And so what we're talking about right now, that's a big shift to the apprenticeship, right? Education in order to become the apprentice. We think about that as the experience route. We've got the education route. So we would never want to make that recommendation and not make sure we haven't looked at every possible option or question. And that's why we seem like, what are you doing? Why, show us what's happening. But that's because you really want to think through that.
And the first question the legislator is going to ask us is there any opposition to this change? They'll ask that anyone who's willing to sponsor the bill, and if we say yes to that, then dead.
No bill said.
So just going back to, again, we move forward with this. This is something we may need to push off to next session.
But if somebody wants to put forward a motion, I think that's an option. That's separate. So the conversation we've had internally on this topic is twofold. One, it seems like we have two issues on the table, one of which we're trying to address right now, which is that education apprentice thing that Lee's brought up. Two, which we can go back to, we have this question on if we're gonna eliminate that middle tier, what does the inspection, the directly supervised inspection number look like? And then sort of three, but I think related, is if that recommendation on the education goes forward, then are we pulling this? Are we pulling the elimination of this middle tier? Because this is that would be a pretty big shift. We'd probably wanna consider pulling this bill right here to eliminate that middle tier license. So I'm trying to let you know what all of that would look like.
Okay, so issue one, does anybody want to move forward with required education?
I think the education required, I know I'm on the outside looking in here, but I just think from a consumer perspective, and that's really what we're here to look at, is I think it's a potential risk for somebody to go in with an apprentice license with no education at all to not have at least a base knowledge of the Texas standards before they go into facilities. I'll go on record saying that, and I
don't think there's any person going into a house. Most are not licensed. The one are licensed, if they're apprentices, don't require anything. So we would be the only entity that have a requirement for an apprentice.
Right.
Plumbers don't, electricians don't, nobody else.
The only other state that, and there may be other states that require apprenticeships, I don't know, but I think, what was it?
Delaware.
Delaware has an apprenticeship and they don't require education for that either.
I don't know if the whole concept is that you are coming to learn the trade, not that you have to learn before you come learn.
Does Delaware have like a standards of practice like that we have?
Yeah, I don't know. I just looked at the education requirements because they're practice, so I don't know.
Bruce, Brian, y'all have any input? Off the record opinions? On the record opinions?
The only thing I would say is I agree with her comment of whatever we do, we need to be sure we like, because trying to get it changed after the fact, the legislature only meets every 2 years, and they're not going to be excited to take this back up if we go, oh, damn, you know.
Bruce, you have any feelings one way or the other?
Look, if it's broken, I don't know what we can do to fix it. And everybody complains about fast track. You've got lifers who are apprentices that plan on going nowhere. And so the tier system was designed to be a professional inspector. It wasn't meant to stay in one place forever. So I think something needs to be addressed in there and corrected. Put time limitations on how long they can stay in a certain area. Retest if that's what it comes down to, if they can't meet that criteria. But I don't think it's fixed, and I don't care what you do, how many hours you make them take. It's not going to correct the issue. So that's my 2 bits worth.
Dave, you have any comments? Watley?
It's a hard thing.
Somebody's got their hand
I
up.
think Jennifer's got her hand up. Jen, do you mean to have your hand up?
I do. This time. I just wanted to, I'm just listening and I want to throw a couple of thoughts out there. One is that, clearly it seems like it would be a difficult path to require education, pre-licensing education for an apprentice license. But what I'm also hearing, or what I think I'm hearing, is concern over maybe the sponsoring inspectors oversight, what actually occurs when the sponsoring inspector is sponsoring the apprentice, what's happening out on the field, what the obligations are to educate the apprentice. We've been exploring that with an ESAC with the broker responsibilities to sales agents and sales agents' expectations of brokers and how to educate in that regard and making some changes there. Appraisers are also required federally to appraiser trainees and supervisory appraisers are required to take a 4-hour appraiser trainee supervisory appraiser course. So I see two similarities there where maybe something less burdensome could be, and I'm just throwing 4 hours out there as an example, but a 4-hour course that sponsoring inspectors must take before they take on apprentices, that kind of educate them in terms of what their obligations are as a sponsoring inspector. Again, I'm throwing this out there just as food for thought. And another thought I had was, I've heard talk of, an 8-hour, a 6-hour, or an 8-hour pre-licensing course for apprentice inspectors based on Texas standards. And the only caution I would throw to that is that in some cases, I don't know if you've heard you have just enough information to be harmful, or just enough education to be harmful. I think that would be my concern, because as I've been listening and I've been looking at all the existing pre-licensing courses and all the work that was put into those, and I see like a baseline of building inspection module 1 and 2, those are significant hours. And so I think my fear would be whether or not you could even create a baseline entry-level course in that few of hours. So that's my 2 cents for what I've been hearing in terms of the discussion.
So would the requiring a sponsoring inspector to take education open a can of worms as much as, would it be as difficult to require or cause any changes or problems with changes as?
That would just be a rule change if we were to do that, wouldn't it?
I don't think so.
It would still be.
To be a sponsoring inspector? See, that would be a statute.
You mean to require?
If we were gonna require, like she suggested, a 4-hour sponsoring inspector course.
I think though that, sorry, so that, and I just said this in my ears, that it's a little bit similar to a discussion we're having right now where you're creating a sponsoring, I can't even say the word, a sponsoring inspector versus a non-sponsoring inspector. And it's a little bit of it's a change in requirements. I think it would be more statutory.
Well, there's already a requirement that you have to meet certain requirements to be a sponsor.
Okay, so.
A certain number of inspections, all that stuff.
Okay, so, and that's in rule?
That's in rule.
Okay, so then maybe there's room to do that. Here's what I'll say. I don't know, this is the first time I've heard this discussion happen.
Yeah.
And so similarly to what I just said, we can't figure it out right here on the fly.
Yes.
And so if we like the idea of looking into, hey, is there anything we could do on the supervisory component of things, we can look into that. I don't know which is which at the moment.
And I will say, so that, you said the rule, but it is actually in statute, so.
It's specified in statute.
The eligibility is as a sponsor.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
Yeah, so, but we can look at that, right? So if this is a bigger issue and we've got the data to back it, sounds like there are multiple angles to potentially approach it. Maybe they're legislative. Maybe it's a bigger topic for a discussion that doesn't happen this session because we don't want to fast track. You never want to fast track, right? So we can look at that side of it. I think in terms of if you want to move on something today and you want to, and what you want to move on is that education for an apprentice, you need a motion, you need a vote, we take it to the commission and see what happens.
Denise, did you ever figure out how many apprentices we have out of 4,000?
Oh yeah, she does have the data, sorry.
Yes, we have 191 active apprentices and 24 inactive. So it's a small share of the just under 5,000 total inspectors.
I also want to just throw out something, if you decide to look into this further over like the next 2 years. Summer and I have talked a lot about targeting communications based on where someone is kind of in the life of their license. So we could address some of this through like sending articles and providing insight to license holders, depending on what's happening with their license. Let's say a sponsoring, someone starts sponsoring, and I'm just speaking, like, Summer, you're probably like, you should stop talking. If someone begins sponsoring an apprentice, well, then maybe we can send them a targeted message that explains what it means to be to support an apprentice well, or what the best practices of that would be. To do some of that education in a way that I would call kind of informal, not from a regulatory standpoint, and more just from a communication standpoint. Doesn't mandate that they read what we send them, but when we first have an apprentice, maybe we start sending them, let's say they've been an apprentice a month, we give them articles about certain SOPs and kind of, lay that out there as just kind of a things we think you should know.
You nailed it. That was great.
Thank you. So some of this we can do in a non-regulatory fashion.
Tony and Mike, are y'all seeing, in your years of experience, have you dealt with many complaints about this? About an apprentice doing something?
Pretty rare.
Oh, that Tony.
That's my experience. I mean, considering the minimum number of, complaints that we get in, the number of apprentices out there.
I only remember a couple of complaints that came in against apprentices.
Yeah, I mean, I remember having a couple of complaints as well. I honestly, I think that the apprentice route, it does create a better, more qualified inspector. And it does depend on who the sponsor is. The suggestion from Chelsea is actually, I was really thinking about that. That's actually a really good suggestion because we do have resources available that we can just make the sponsors aware. And there's the problem is not the apprentice themselves, because as Jennifer was saying, even if we require them to take an 8-hour course, they're still gonna make mistakes because they're still gonna need that supervision. They're not gonna be ready to do any inspection. So that's really, it's good, but they can still get it after they get licensed as an apprentice through their sponsor. As Steve and Scott were saying, they can always say, hey, I need you to go look at the SOPs. They're free, they're on the website. You don't have to take a class. Familiarize yourself with them. And, all those resources could be addressed through, an article, education, materials, manual, whatever you want to call it. That would be a good solution.
Can we say that as soon as you get your license approved to be an apprentice, that you're automatically emailed the SOPs and what your sponsoring should be teaching you? I'm sorry. But you see where I'm getting at?
No, I agree. So what Chelsea has pointed out is something that is kind of a longer term thing that will go hand in hand with, I know we keep talking about the database that's forthcoming, but I do have to have that information really squared away of who's just become an apprentice. And then it's kind of a domino effect from there. Basically, it's a drip campaign. I've identified you as someone who is a new sponsor, and now you're getting these emails about sponsorship. I've identified you as a new apprentice, and now you're getting these emails about being an apprentice, and here are the SOPs. So yes, under the current environment of Gov Delivery, that's not a capability. But it is something that I'm working toward in the future. I can't say how near yet,
So it is database connected.
It is database connected. We just don't have that information over here in this other database.
Well, I mean, I personally don't want to hit the major reset button on this, but I also want to be respectful for if anybody wants to put it out there, so we can either just get it hammered out.
Just so we don't beat a dead horse here, because we're spending a lot more time on this, I think, than anybody had really intended, and obviously I'm in the minority, so I will make the motion just so that it gets on the record and gets voted down. I have no problem with that, but I still think there should be at least a base 8-hour SOP course for that. So I will make a motion that prior to, in order to, as a requirement to obtain an apprentice license, you take an 8-hour SOP course.
All right, motion's been made. You have a second?
I'll say.
Second it. All right, we've had a lot of discussion. Any more discussion?
Should we do a roll call?
Yeah, I think we should.
Yeah, okay. Amber, can you? So just to make sure everybody knows, the motion is to recommend a legislative change to require qualified education prior to becoming an apprentice license.
8-hour SOP, the 8-hour SOP.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, Lee,
Yes.
Dave,
Dave Motley? All right, we'll come back.
come back. Mike,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Bruce,
Yes.
Steve, Scott,
No.
Sean,
No.
Dave,
Yeah. That was my time.
Stain.
I don't know.
Dave, you're muted.
Give us a thumbs up before all.
Dave Motley, are you on the call still?
I don't see the.
Yeah, he's up there
He's on
and he's
it.
muted.
There you go.
Dave, can you hear us?
Here, I can hear you, yes.
Okay.
I can hear you.
So are you in favor of adding education to the statute or not?
Yes, I am.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
So the motion passes 5-3?
Yes.
So now the number of inspections, which is the original question.
Right.
Well, okay.
Yeah, I think if we're gonna go in that direction, or, I
I
guess we
think-
don't know yet, right? If we're gonna pull this bill.
Yeah, there's a couple items, just, and let's do this first and then we'll talk about that. So let's do the number of inspections.
All right. I mean, I just came up with 100. That's about 400 hours of training in the field, but I mean, I'll go out different numbers.
Probably a lot more than 100 inspections. Maybe 600.
400. Yeah, I mean, I figured 4 hours one site.
Yeah, and then another 4
Yeah.
offsite.
I mean, you could do
So
that.
right now it's 25 in 3 months.
Yes.
So if we keep it to what the bill drafted, 12 months, think about that, the number of inspections an apprentice would do.
I was thinking 50. I
Okay with 52.
do 40 or 50 on my professional inspector.
I'm still like at 100.
So
You're at 100?
Kind of like 100 too.
I'm at
To be honest
100.
with you.
Okay.
Because you're not doing anything for the first few times.
It's about a year of training. Well,
It
10
is.
months.
It actually comes out to about, if you're doing 2 a day, you figure companies, but we're doing 6 or 7, 7 days a week, from 8 to 8, someday.
Well, the
one
other,
inspection.
the other thing to consider is we want to, ideally, if I've heard all of us right, we would rather people go through this apprentice program than take a fast track,
Right.
because it provides better
Right.
quality inspection.
Right.
So is 100 too, and I like 100 too, but is 100 just too many to where they're going to tackle it, I'm just going to go on fast track and be done? We have to make, we kind of want to make it, want it to make it be a little enticing.
50's at 6 months over a period of time.
So the difference called 75.
The higher the number, the better, in my opinion.
I agree.
I'm sorry to be that way, but
No,
I'll take it, I'll take 75. I just don't think you get enough with 50 inspections. I just really don't.
Inspector, you got it.
Yeah, to be a professional inspector, I don't think 50 will do it.
So
You can go to school and do 5.
I want to just throw this out here, just because we're all thinking about the hardship on the apprentice, and I get that, but this is under direct supervision, so the supervisor also has, I just throwing that out.
And most apprentices are being paid to be, I pay my guys $300 a week to sit in a truck. Okay, that's the minimum fee I'm
That's a
gonna pay.
labor law you violate there.
But they're sitting in my truck and they agree.
Scott Regan, R-E-E.
Anyway, I just want to make sure we're considering both sides of it.
Yeah, but I'm over here going, if you wanna do this job, you're gonna show up and understand is you're working at this and then we go in another direction. But, I just don't feel that
I
25 is just
personally
not enough.
I probably wouldn't take on apprentices if I knew I had to do 100 direct supervision before they become productive. I mean, right now, they can do 25, and they can sit and do their license, and then they'll probably do another 25 just personally before I let them go by themselves, but they're actually earning an income. But if it takes 100, which could be a year, and not really producing real income, and then a year of burden on me.
That's what I'm saying, that's why I said you gotta consider both sides.
Shannon?
Shannon Gateway again. Can you remind me of what the trade-off is? If I can either have my apprentice license and take the extra courses, it's 60 hours?
Basic courses, 90, so right now it's 25 and 90 hours.
But I can get my apprentice license, I can sign up
For another
professional
40
course
hours.
and never do another ride-along if I really wanted to.
How long is a professional?
What's the hours on the substitute experience, I guess is.
Substitute experience is 330, is that right?
No, it used to be.
Used to be, no.
Used to be 448.
Now it's like
It's just two classes,
192.
2 courses is all it is.
192 is professional.
That's with the
Okay, so it's still required them to take the legal and ethics, the standards of practice, and the laws and regulations.
It's two classes.
27.
It's an extra
No, it's only
for
real estate?
business
Yes,
operations or something, and then.
The business and the report writing and the business operations.
It's 90 hours.
But yeah, so now a new prospective inspector is looking at 6 months to a year of direct supervision, or probably another 2 to 4 weeks of school. And I've got a professional license by myself,
Yeah.
and I've kind of maybe showed somebody I could do 5 inspections, and that's it. And then you can do 5 or 75. So,
What's the clock hours to get a professional license?
194, do the substitute.
And you just do the apprentice as 9, so you take hours.
And then you have, well, the way the bill is drafted is you would combine the two real estate, so it'd be 90 plus 40, you get 120. You have to take 120 hours if we want to do this route, and then whatever number of inspections you guys think is appropriate. Or 198.
Yeah, so you take 60 more hours and do 5 ride-alongs and you get your professional.
Yeah, a week.
But let's also think about this. The bill takes out that middle tier. You don't have to be licensed as a real estate inspector anymore. You go straight from an apprentice to a professional.
Right.
The only difference is, I mean, there's other differences, but what you're doing is you got one where you don't apprentice, you just take the substitute experience thing, or you got the other one where you learn by being sponsored, and you can get a professional at the end of that as well.
How many hours of classes do you take if you're doing that route?
One sponsor.
So
That's if we keep it the way it is.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, you take a lot of classes still.
Yeah, I'd like to see that education go down and the riding-alongs go up.
Sorry. Well, stand up, take your hand.
Mike Hamel, what I was stating earlier was just on the hours at 25 inspections, if you take somebody that's done 25 inspections with a good sponsor versus somebody that's just out of school, I can guarantee you the person that's got 25 hours is gonna know far more.
I mean, it sounds
That's
like,
only 25
sounds like the
inspections.
bill needs to be pulled, because everybody's rethinking everything about the apprentice.
It does sound that way.
Sounds like everybody's rethinking apprentice.
It does sound like maybe we don't, because as Vanessa, and I get this, we don't
Like,
want
it
to.
goes back to education.
We go back, we
Come
have the subcommittees look at whatever various parts they need to, and then at the end of.
I'll make a motion to pull.
Because why have an apprentice license that's so hard to achieve?
I'm fine with that, I agree.
Do it once and do it right.
I make a motion to pull the bill.
Well, and I think this way we can get stakeholder input.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
right now we have none.
Right.
Well, we have you guys, which.
But why make it such a hard hurdle? to get
I'd second that motion to pull the bill.
Thank you. Do we have an agreement?
Everybody in favor?
Okay, so, based on that, we will move forward with the inspector recovery fund bill, and we will hold off on the repeal of the inspector license.
Full.
Gotcha.
And then we just need to send it back to education and everything on.
I think when we originally looked at dropping the second tier, the middle tier, we weren't changing anything else. We hadn't talked about
Apprentices,
modifying.
no, we
hadn't.
Yeah.
No, it was.
It was just a
I
drop
think
in the
it's just
middle.
more it's like everything, right? You know, somebody like, it's a real simple rule change. It's
Right.
never,
Well, I
think-
it's always like, in
Yeah.
the legislation, it's like, oh, turns out it does impact.
Yeah.
I think Steve's right, when we did this was prior to all the education changes that happened, so when you look
Right.
at what the education changes now, it was gonna be, you take that middle tier out, it's 120 hours versus 330, now it's
Right.
120 versus 198,
Yeah.
there's no real.
It's gotta be an incentive to go through the apprentice
Yeah,
program.
okay.
Right. Especially if we as an agency put so much value on the experience
Right.
component of things,
Good
so
with
it's a
that.
bigger,
Yeah.
bigger conversation.
We're good, pull that, we'll bring it back to
So I
that.
didn't think about by dropping the middle one.
What's your fault?
Now, it was 100, it was basically 200 hours, 200 inspections, I mean, to get your professional as an apprentice.
Yeah.
I don't think we.
Unsupervised.
I think we need to take a break.
No, supervised.
Is this-
Well,
We
no,
didn't vote on
indirect
that.
supervision.
Oh, we need
As
to
a
do
real
a
estate
vote.
inspector.
And do we need to vote to?
Yeah, we need
Okay,
to,
okay.
First one.
we need to do a vote on the motion about dropping the bill.
Alright, so we have a motion on the floor, been seconded.
Can I just make sure, because we need to make a motion to move forward, or do we need to make a motion on that?
Motion to move forward with the recovery fund removal and
did
to hold off on the,
They did, I don't.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought we voted on the recovery fund, did we
I
not?
thought we-
No.
no.
Okay. Well, yeah, if you're good, let's take them
Alright.
separate, so
So,
recovery fund.
someone not gonna make a motion?
Motion to move forward on the elimination of the recovery fund.
I second.
Alright. Motion second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Alright, so the second motion that Scott had was to pull the bill. It was seconded by Bruce.
By Brian.
Brian, sorry.
Brian.
Alright, we're still good with that motion? Scott?
Yes.
Any more discussion on it? All in favor of pulling the bill? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, then we'll take a break.
Yes, let's do it.
5-minute break.
5 minutes.
What do we have left?
I think that's it.
There are solutions, but there's.
All right, ready?
All right.
That's like 14 years.
Let's get back to it. We needed to, Denise, we needed to bring something up about the
There's nothing
DBA.
academic. Of course,
Hi, can everybody hear me? I can't tell if there's a delay or not.
Yep.
Hi,
we're good.
Denise Sample, Director of Licensing. I wanted to bring up a question, as soon as you guys, or you as a committee made the decision about the form change and adding a DBA line, I reached out to my team and they reminded me that we do not add DBAs to apprentice licenses. Those are only added to a real estate inspector or a professional inspector license. So there is a form that already exists for notice of assumed name or DBA, where a real estate inspector or professional inspector can add or delete a DBA name from their record. So this brings up the question, is it necessary to add a DBA line to that termination of sponsorship form?
Well, if we're removing a real estate inspector and they have a DBA, then we'll probably need to have that for them. Correct? You're saying they don't do it for apprentices, but they do it for real estate inspectors?
We will, what we don't do is add a DBA to an apprentice license.
Right.
So we only add it to the real estate license, but a real estate inspector can also submit that form to delete a DBA from that license. So just wanted to pose the question, if that's still the direction that the committee wants to go, we can figure out a way to add that and make sure that it only applies to the termination of a real estate inspector. But I wanted,
I think it's best to get it on the form, because sometimes you're terminating people under not great circumstances and they might not be willing to remove certain DBAs and stuff like that from their license. Steven?
Well, we're not, it says the apprentice, your apprentice or your inspector, you're removing either one.
Right.
So on that form, we're not talking about the apprentice, we're talking about an inspector.
Real estate inspector, yeah.
Oh, I thought we were removing an apprentice.
That's
Or
real estate.
It's both.
That's right, because it's
Because
either,
both-
it's not
both
just
be
the
a
apprentice that would
Right.
be removed from
The
sponsorship.
form doesn't just say for apprentice, it
Right.
actually says for
Right.
apprentice, inspector.
What if I have a professional that's under my DBA? You look at the
But you're not
professional.
sponsoring.
That's a different
No,
form.
But they have my DBA. They don't work for me anymore.
There's a separate
but their
form for
name
that.
still has my DBA.
I think that's what she said, they had a separate form.
They have
to
a
remove
form
the
for
DBA.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we're good.
This actually says apprentice real estate inspector.
Right.
A real estate inspector shows that they're sponsored by you, but are they required to have a DBA as well?
If they're advertising.
Yeah,
that's-
they
If
should.
they advertise it, it does state on there that they have a DBA.
So
The
let's
DBA is
just
the
go ahead and
company
get
that
it.
they're working for, that is
Yes.
the same as a sponsor.
So let's go ahead and just keep it, get it added to the form, the termination form.
Okay, we can do that. And do we also want to indicate that that would only be, well, I guess it doesn't matter to add it for real. I might be overcomplicating it.
Yeah, whatever you need for internally, whatever's gonna work best for y'all.
Okay.
I don't think it matters though.
How about if it
I
actually says,
wanted to
is
pose
it
the
for
question when they brought that up.
Yeah.
Does DBA need to be removed as well, just check box.
Yeah.
Put the DBA if applicable.
You gotta list it.
Yeah.
Okay, do you have what you need, Denise?
Yeah, just
I'm
put
not
if
sure I heard the
applicable.
last parts of the conversation.
We were just talking about if it's a checkbox or not, but I think it needs to be a blank so we can put the name of the DBA. It has to be removed.
Have this
In case they
DBA.
have multiple DBAs.
Mhm. Okay, well, we will add the line.
And Vanessa, what else? We need?
That was the one, that was the only extra.
Okay, all right. All right. 14, discussion and possible action regarding renewal of license. Abby.
It's me. So this is actually a concept that we already discussed back in April, but we just didn't have a rule draft for you to look at, or a revised rule draft. If you recall, this stems actually from a commission initiative, something that they asked us to look into, not only for inspector rules, but also for broker sales agent rules. And so we have, we've met internally, we've met during a commission workshop to kind of talk through this. So we wanted to present to you what we hope to propose at the November meeting to accomplish this. And so essentially what we are doing is we are getting rid of something we call the look back process. So some of you may be already familiar with that process, but it's a process both for brokers and their sponsored sales agents, and as well as inspectors, where essentially a license can expire, but as long as the sponsoring broker or the inspector certifies or attests that apprentice or real estate inspector or sales agent was supervised during that time period that the license was expired, they can essentially, when they go to renew, they can have no lapse in active licensure. So it's essentially kind of going back and saying, actually, you were active the whole time, even though technically there was an expiration period. So the proposed resolution to that is really in subsection E of this rule, where after kind of vetting this, again, internally with the commission during the workshop, the idea is just to have everyone renew on an inactive status. We're getting rid of that certification, that sponsorship or certification or attestation process to say we're not going to do that anymore. Essentially, if you want to renew after your license expired, it'll be on an inactive status, and we won't have this sort of look back where we say, okay, actually all of this time period we were active at this point.
And then in order to reactivate, they have to fulfill all the requirements in order to do that.
Yeah, so then the language in 3 here kicks you over to the current rule of 215, which deals with reactivation of the license, and it's, you know, again, it would depend on kind of where you are, but yeah, all those normal things that you go through for an active license.
Basically getting rid of the logistical pain in the keyboard for.
Yeah, and kind of this time period of where you're not actually active, but you have someone, you know, certifying or attesting, oh, they were fine, you know. So getting rid of that kind of vouch system, if you will. So if there's, yeah, so I think essentially if you're okay with this, unless you have any questions, we would just be looking for your recommendation for this to go forward to the commission. And there are some corresponding rules that deal with the broker side, of the broker associations that kind of mirror all this.
Any questions or discussion on this change?
Make a motion to recommend as approved.
Second?
All right. Motion by Lee, second by Scott. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. All right. 15. Another fast one. I mean, are we getting paid overtime? Discussion and possible action regarding payment for inspection at closing. Lee?
It keeps coming up. So I'm wondering if there isn't a way that we can't clarify this rule. Because I think in the end, getting paid at closing for an inspection has a lot of potential risk to it, especially to the consumer. And I think that's what the intent of this rule was supposed to be. But I think it still leaves enough of a gray area that some people are still getting paid at closing for inspections. And now it's starting to get to a point, it was getting to a point up in other areas, but now it's starting to creep its way down here, especially with the market shift and whatnot, that certain license holders are saying, well, if you aren't gonna get paid at closing for an inspection, we're never gonna refer you. I mean, it's just the way everybody does it now, blah, blah, blah. And so part of the other issue, I mean, there's that, because I think it's a huge risk to consumers of getting paid at closing, because what's to say that the inspector may word something or not word something or put something a certain way to ensure that that property actually closes. So I think there's a huge risk there. On top of that, inspectors are allowed in getting paid at closing. I know there's companies that will pay the inspector and then they'll do it, get paid at closing for that. And I think that's a whole separate agreement, as long as the person who's conducting the inspection is getting paid for that inspection at that time. I'm good with, but the other problem you run into is now if we're talking about getting paid at closing, you have to submit that information to a title company. You're not a party to that contract. You have to keep track of whether that thing actually closes or not. If it doesn't close, when it closes, how it closes, did they send the check to the right place? And you're creating, basically, an inspector now has to have a whole accounts receivable department, in order to deal with this. And sometimes closings, contracts go on for 4 or 5 or 6 months. And, there's tax implications. If you did the inspection in November and now you don't get paid until, February for it, it falls on a different tax year. I mean, I think it really overcomplicates the process across the board to get paid at closing for an inspection. I'd just like to see us clarify this rule so that doesn't happen.
A couple of things, it's not against the rules to get paid at closing. I just want to specify that, there's nothing that prohibits that.
Right.
And there seem to be 2 different issues. There's the consumer protection issue raised, but there's also something that is completely unrelated to consumer protection, which you also raised, which is the for lack of a term, hassle on the inspector. So those are 2 separate things that I think, one, in terms of consumer protection, that's something to weigh on. The other one is, I don't know how much of that is TREIC's responsibility in terms of moving forward. But if there's a consumer protection issue, that's something. But as we mentioned at the last meeting, there's a rule in place that says if you doctor your report to mislead somebody into closing, that's already against the rules.
What rule is that?
Right here, an inspector shall, it's right up there on the top there.
An inspector shall
not
not.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I interrupted you. An inspector shall not inspect a property when any compensation or future referrals depend on reported findings or on the closing or settlement of a property.
I don't think that clarifies what you're talking about. I really don't.
What does that say?
Why would we allow inspections to get paid for at closing?
Why would we weigh into that business practice?
Well, I think it's a very old practice that's been going on. I mean, it was very popular in the 90s when I started. I don't see it happening much down, and I know there's some areas that do, but I think there's a whole like, a lot of issues that could influence the inspector's decision or write stuff and not write stuff up that we can't regulate. Like, we know the realtors, refer a lot of business, so, well, I don't want to piss off Jane Doe, I better not write this up. I mean, there's all kinds of things that the inspector has to say, I'm not gonna follow down that road, and I think that's one of them.
It's also a bit of a change of direction. In the past, when a contractual issue has been brought before the committee's always said, that's a contractual issue, we're not gonna weigh in on how an inspector is supposed to conduct their business. And now, the inspector committee would be weighing in on a contractual issue on how the inspector conducts their business.
That's a Guardian thing? That's a totally different thing.
Yeah, because the inspector's still getting paid at the time of the inspection, and then another company's dealing with the closing side.
Can you explain that? When you said that, and I think because I don't know this world.
It's basically, they're making a
Like
fee.
a third party.
It's a third-party company that pays the inspector for the inspection.
As long as your client agrees to sign this form, they pay you in advance, and then they charge you a fee, like they were taking a credit card. And they go,
charge the
inspector, and they they guarantee to get the funds. They say, okay, here's your money, and we'll deal with the client.
Instead of waiting 4 months for your money.
But the client has to sign.
Yeah.
So this is the accounts receivable department.
Yeah, the client.
Right, that's a third-party way of doing it.
Yeah.
Do people use this?
Oh, yeah, people are using it a lot now, because they're pushing it, all the big CRM services are pushing it a lot, because they're making fees off it, so.
Yeah.
It's like a credit card, merchant fee.
Who would be mad about a change to this?
Realtors.
Would there be inspectors who like this?
I know if I use.
I wanna run my business the way I've been doing it, and there's a small percentage of clients who pay at closing.
That's fine with you.
That's fine.
I mean, like VA, a lot of times with VA, they want to pay closing, they want the seller wants to pay for it, has to pay for some of the fees.
You have areas of West Texas and East Texas that it's standard practice that you write one check to the title company. And the title company determines who gets what money out of that. Prime example, I waited 4 months for a check, and where Lee and I were talked about is my court came in, I'm withstanding holding $4,200 and not being receiving money. I have all these inspections out there that they're not paying me because they go to closing, it takes 3 or 4 months to go to closing. So I have to show a loss on my taxes, and then I have to go back to my taxes now in the next quarter and show a gain, and then they go back to my last quarter taxes, and the IRS start to fine me.
But it's like,
And it turns into an IRS issue, it turns into a tax issue.
but it's like Tony said, we don't regulate anybody, any other ways you do business. Why would we regulate
Right.
how that affects your IRS returns and stuff like that?
I'm bringing this up because that's what Lee's trying. Secondly is, we've got to the point that if you want to do it at closing, it's $100 more. The realtors are like, and they're bad mouthing me. I have them in text messages and emails. And I'm like, it's causing a business issue. And there's realtors coming from other states that say they do it in this other state. You can look it up, and I know I teach inspectors in multiple states, and I'm like, no, you're lying because I teach inspectors. And then the next thing you know, you're all over social media. So
What happens if you say, no, I'm not getting paid at closing?
they
I don't get
badmouth
paid.
you in social media. Or they go to another.
But let me ask a question. Why wouldn't this just be an enforcement exercise? If the rule says what it says at E1, why can't enforcement when somebody gets paid through closing, because that's clearly, it's contingent upon it closing to get paid, go take them up on an enforcement action?
I think there has to be a complaint filed first, but.
A lot of people aren't gonna file a complaint against, realtors and whatnot because of your retribution.
What?
But wouldn't the complaint be against the inspector though? Because isn't that for us as a board to say, if you're gonna get paid that way, that's in violation of E1 just on its face, because the only way apparently you get compensated is if it closes.
But it's not a violation of E1 because there's nothing in the rule that prevents an inspector from getting paid at closing. The only thing that prevents is for when, based on the reported findings, if they modify the reported findings or anything.
But that's not what it says. It says an inspector shall not inspect a property, comma, when in any compensation or future referrals, i.e. the compensation is on the closing or settlement of the property. So if you're inspecting a property that has to have it closed to get paid, then that violates E1.
Well, not necessarily. Like I said, I'm playing devil's advocate because I'm on your side here, but I'm playing devil's advocate here because just because the property doesn't close doesn't mean you don't get paid. You can
Right.
file a civil claim against that person for the money that they owed you based on the contractual agreement to pay for the inspection.
But it doesn't say that in AE1 because it's dependent, your payment was depending on closing unless you've got some separate agreement now that you've signed that says, well, I'm going to get paid at closing, but if I don't, I still have a right to go sue you. Now, now there's got to be another agreement there. And from a consumer inspection, or sorry, a consumer side, it seems like the rule ought to just be exactly what it said, and that being enforcement action to go, if you take property expecting to get paid at closing, implicit in that is there's an implicit bias, or the potential of a bias that goes, well, I got to make sure this thing closes and do my part,
So I think we need to clarify it.
Okay, one more question, and then I'm gonna be quiet, I promise. But in practice, would you agree to get paid at closing, or if no closing, upon, like, how do you avoid that civil thing? Like, do you have a, or if no closing, then ...
I tell people, and this doesn't happen a lot, maybe 5% of my inspections, but I don't. As long as you understand that if it doesn't close, I still need to get paid. Do they sign a specific agreement saying that? No.
Do you ever not get paid?
Not anymore. Well, the
question was,
What'd you change? Like, what does that look like?
Well, I now have an office staff who
helps?
follows up on this stuff. When it was a one-man business and I was doing the inspection, the scheduling, the invoicing, the collection, I couldn't keep up.
Most inspectors are sole
Right.
proprietors.
It's a risky deal.
But it should be the inspector's choice if they want to take the chance.
Well, but yeah, I think it also promotes the issue of you get an unscrupulous inspector that goes, I'll sign anything and approve anything as long as you get me a check at closing,
I want to say, there's nothing in the rules that prevents someone from doing this 15 minutes after they agree to do the inspection in the beginning. I think we're just having.
To do what, 15 minutes?
For this is a really great agent, gives me lots of business.
Yeah, right, there's all kinds of factors.
I'm not gonna look at this thing.
Right.
But
That's
there's
what I'm
still a
saying.
mechanism where the buyer, which is
Right.
the inspector's client,
If they get
files a
harmed.
complaint.
Yeah,
Same thing on this situation, you get paid at the end. If they're not following the standards of practice and what the law requires them, there's a mechanism where you file a complaint, we're going to punish you if you do that.
and I just don't think the complaints,
I don't read this
I think
rule
forward
as having an explicit prohibition on that. For me, it's where you're doing this dependent upon the findings,
right,
which there's already rules out there that says if you violate the standards of practice,
right.
then you're gonna be punished.
But to me, it also seems to set the inspector up. Anytime you take compensation from the title company, if I get cranky as a homeowner and go, well, you missed X, Y, or Z, I'm going to point back to Rule E1 and say, well, hey, you shouldn't have done that because it's implicit in this. And then the way to protect the inspectors is just go, you can't do that.
That's never been interpreted that way. So.
Well, again, that's what happens when you have a lawyer sitting here looking at it from a lawyer's brain, of kind of going, it's a concern, and I think that concern cuts both ways.
And a SOA judge would have to agree, and they would ask the question, where's the interpretation? Where's your experts? And frankly, we don't have any prior disciplinary action or any history that would show that closings or, you can't get paid at closings.
But has it ever been litigated then at SOA under E1? Have you ever had a case that went to SOA to interpret Rule E1?
No, but they would look at precedents for the very minimum if they're trying to interpret it, and they would base upon our opinion and then read the rule and then possibly make a second opinion.
Well, I mean, the SOA judge is entitled to interpret the rule. It's not bound on the agency that made the rule. I mean, they can look in the rulemaking history, but I don't know how much in the rulemaking history of E1 being developed was there. I just was curious if the rule had ever been litigated at SOA.
I have serious concerns taking a case there without some sort of precedence or at least some sort of consensus from the agency that is the regulatory body to punish someone under this.
I've always read this as when you take out, because there's a lot of, there's 2 or 3 or statements in there. So you take out certain pieces of the ors, which are optional. An inspector shall not inspect the property when any compensation depends on the closing or settlement of the property. To me, that seems, if you start picking those things out, it seems straightforward that you're not supposed to be doing an inspection when compensation depends on the closing of the property. My concern is that it's not really clarified in there. It's just with the or statements and whatnot. So I was just kind of maybe break that apart, just so it's a little clearer.
But I think you're saying it is, that this is saying it is a violation. Right. And they're saying, TREIC is saying they don't feel like it is.
But that's not what that says.
Okay, so you want to clarify that, and these are my words. It's fine to be paid at closing, but your findings can't be contingent on
I don't think
a closing, or you want to say you cannot be paid at closing?
I don't think it should be paid at closing.
Okay.
Because I think that in and of itself is the risk, is being paid at closing.
Because of the connection to contingent on what you're finding.
So the pool to manipulate the reports or will close.
Right.
I read this rule, the big word here is depend. So there has to be compensation that depends on the successful closing. So if that basically to me is saying, okay, if it successfully closes, I get paid. If it doesn't close, then I don't get paid. That is the wrongful conduct there. But the fact that it closes, or the fact that they get paid at closing, that is sort of a neutral thing. There's no wrongful conduct to get paid here at the beginning or to get paid here at the end. They're just getting paid. There's nothing wrong with that. So there's no wrongful conduct to prescribe, to prohibit. If we prohibit payment at closing, then we're prohibiting something that's perfectly legal.
All these inspections I do that get paid at closing, I would never do one if I'm only gonna get paid if it closes. My deal is, even if it doesn't close, you still owe me.
Right, I'm doing an inspection based on what I see, not on.
And you lost money before, but now you have a staff that follows up with that can make sure that you get paid if that doesn't close.
But isn't the heart of this to not throw, I mean, you're not altering your inspection based on getting the closing, right? And so you have a duty to, protect your license. I have the same duty, right? I mean, I get that. So what we're saying is you cannot throw the results of your inspection to reach a successful closing.
And closing's just one of the reasons an inspector might modify his report.
Well,
one might be closing, one might be.
Referrals.
One is the license agent saying, hey, can you reword this, because it sounds really bad.
But I think that's in there, right? And the answer to that is no.
That's something you can file a complaint against an agent, that's bad faith. They're acting bad faith against their own client, because they're required to.
Which inspector would never file that complaint.
And I get that, but we still have the tools to do something like that.
Yeah, I think that's right. We talk about referrals. It's saying you can't base your inspection off of anything other than the inspection that you did. And I agree, like in the real world, do things get more complicated? Yes, but there has to be a little bit of ownership on the part of the inspector to say, it's my license, I'm not gonna do it. I mean, I will say this, if I gave this example the other day, if Chelsea was like, hey, can you do this thing that is against the law? I would say, no, I'd rather go get a different job than to lose my license, right? I mean, there's gotta be a little bit of that accountability on the license holder.
I see this potentially increasing the cost for consumers as well, because inspectors, if you're wanting me to take the risk of getting paid at closing, I'm gonna charge more for the inspection.
But I think it's a dying practice. I think it's a dying practice.
What prevents you from doing that?
Because then you are considering yourself a lender. Because that.
Well, you can increase your
When I signed up with Guardian to do the pay at close, they say you're not allowed to charge more for that inspector or that inspection that is paying at close, because then you're considered a lender. They can charge the inspector, and the inspector can raise his fee across the board.
I think,
I'm just,
yeah, I know.
I was
it's
kind of
fun.
thinking about
I don't
it.
know. But I mean, other than that program, I think I thought this was a dying thing. Because people started using their credit cards all the time.
Yeah.
I started hearing about this less and less until this new program came out. I mean, I understand some parts of the state is still going on, but I think in your major areas, and I don't sound
It's
like.
coming back around too.
It is.
I mean, so we
There's
had.
advertising all over.
We had discussion last meeting about this. I thought we had basically said that we want to move forward with this and no one moved at that time. So I think it's the same situation we had with the apprentice thing. I think we need to put it to a vote. I think there needs to be a motion made, put it to a vote if we want to move forward with clarifying this language. And then we to specify, like Lee's saying, that hey, closing is prohibited. I mean,
It would be to direct staff to draft something
Right.
to that effect, right?
yeah, I would just like to
Right?
see us,
That wouldn't be clarifying though, I mean, that would be changing,
The rule.
yeah.
yeah,
Just to be clear, that's not a clarification of the language,
Right.
that's saying
That would be
here on
changing.
out it's prohibited.
It's kind of like removing, taking a credit card as a choice of payment. It's just one of the methods because of the potential.
or what would be an appropriate way to determine the committee's feelings to move forward or not move forward.
Yeah, if you get I mean, that's right, ultimately, it'd be a motion to direct staff to come back with rule language. And I wanna make sure, you'd wanna say exactly what you want it to be, would, strike.
To prohibit the
Yeah,
payment
to
of
prohibit the
closing.
payment of closing, and I assume that means strike E1, but we could figure that out.
Why would you? Oh, I see what you're saying.
Or at least amend it
Yeah,
to an
amend it.
extent,
We'd
but
have to make it
I
work.
don't, right, like I said, rules get complicated fast, but yeah, we could come back with language to prohibit it at closing, but,
I think what Sean's saying is that because this came up last meeting, he's trying to figure out a way to determine what the progress of the committee needs to be, so maybe.
yeah, so it'd be a motion to that and a vote, and then if that goes forward.
I thought it was resolved last meeting, and we did not think it was, because, that you saw an advertisement or something like that, and you sent an email saying, we just decided last meeting, so there was obviously confusion.
But
At
it's not
last
just
meeting, so I'd like to,
It's come out in mass.
no, I understand, but that's why I'd like to just resolve it. Either we're gonna move forward trying to correct this problem, or we put it to bed.
Well, and here, we would not be proposing the rule right now.
Right.
So
We would just
in essence, the motion would be just to direct
direct
staff
right,
to create separation, and then it would come back and we could discuss it.
right,
And
correct,
if we voted it down at that time, we voted it down at that time,
correct,
but at least some clarification.
Right.
Just to vote on, rather than just
Yeah,
going back and
I mean, I
forth.
think it's a take the temperature on what, on
Yeah.
if you wanna prohibit getting paid at closing. If you
Correct.
don't wanna prohibit that, then please don't make staff draft that.
right, correct, right.
I can point out something else that you can bring back you may get pressure, but I mean, there's a rule where it says you don't have to provide your report until 2 days after payment.
Right.
So you say, the rules require me to do this, and the only way I get around it is a written agreement with my client. And that's not my business practice.
Yeah, can we change
Now,
that?
that's a business decision, all that stuff, all that way, but there's something to counter the pressure.
Yeah.
I understand that your industry is getting.
Well, and I think, like we said earlier, inspectors have lots of pressures put on them by all kinds of outside influences on whether they should write something off. And most, I would say the vast majority of people resist those pressures and write up what's wrong in the house.
In education classes for realtors, when I bring that up, I get them going, what have I had right here since 2019? And they're like, well, they never told us. And I'm like, well, your broker never told you, that's their fault. I'm like,
Well, maybe
it's actually in.
communicate.
Well, here I am.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah,
it
that's
sounds
what
like
I
a
tell
really
them.
good article messaging for.
With those people. But I've actually, every time I bring that slide up, I'm looking at it going, okay, let's take a break, because this is good. That one slide will actually disrupt the whole class. And it will go and I'm not joking, I just did one in Dallas, to 150 of them, and now, I mean, it took us 2 hours to get back together. And I'm not exaggerating, it just went nuts for that reason. As half of the room knew about it, the other half didn't, and they're like, well, how am I gonna get my inspection report? Pay your inspection. And that was something that Lee and I brought in last meeting, is why take that wording and make it part of the broker responsibility. That they need to be informed that there's been a lot of changes on this side to eliminate the confusion on the area where we determined 4 years ago who our client was. And the realtor's like, well, I can't pay them. Like, yeah, you can. You gotta sign the agreement because that means you're the client. Whoever pays you, your client. They still don't understand. So it comes down to, we've made a lot of changes to eliminate this problem to start with, and we're still, the backlash is coming because there's realtors that have been doing this for 10, 15 years and they have no idea it ever came out.
Really? You'd be surprised the stuff we run into that's been law for 20 years.
Yeah, I'm just bringing it up because I know, and then they argue, well, it's right there, the date when it was changed, it was emailed and informed to you,
But we can take that up. I mean, we can, you know, we're gonna do legal 1, legal 2, like, we've got avenues to communicate if we know what to communicate, and I think it'd be cool to have some inspector stuff, you know, something to that effect of, hey, did you know?
and I'm not being mean when I say this, is I read a lot about realtors, what their job is, so that I understand how to help them. And I do one-on-one training with them so much that I've learned a lot about realtors, and it's like professional to an apprentice. They're only given so much information. And last year, you know, the realtors were 13 new documents. And
2 seconds.
realtors, I'm sorry. So, and I know there was a bunch of new contracts that came out, and I actually teach those contracts. I'm like, did you know this came out referring this? And they're like, what? So there is an education difference between us and them, and there's a lot of communication. And I'm like, well, this is something that I know because it deals with my transaction of what I find on my report. You now have this new report that you need to be going at. So it comes down to an education in my mind the whole time.
I think we can also leverage our relationship with like Texas Realtors to say, hey, we've written some pieces about.
Realtors.
Yeah, the
Makes me happy.
realtors,
He's a realtor.
about what inspectors can and can't do, and you working with, you know, just factual things that point to the law, that point to, you know, you could file a complaint when these things happen, or you're seeing this, and this is what, and I think they would appreciate that too. So we're doing it, we share it with them to share more broadly. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to get
I've always
this
felt that
out.
that would eliminate this question about paying and closing and when we're supposed to do that. That's why I teach the way I do.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I think that it's something we could communicate more and better.
So my proposal is to, the question about paying and closing is to try to deal with education and try to get more information out to the realtors of how the things that have changed. And we did that 2 days after you get paid to help reduce the problem. That was the beginning of everything 3 years ago, where realtors were required, they'd start arguing with the inspectors saying, just send me the report, you got 3 days. And I feel that what Mike said is actually, that's the biggest issue that I think that can solve the problem, the biggest thing that we're in.
So you feel like we don't need to direct staff to
No, I think
do
we
the
need
kind
to
of
talk,
changes in the,
get more information out to the realtors.
is that, are you, where are you at with that? Because we gotta wrap up Steven's fifth and last meeting. He's only got 4 more meetings left.
I don't know, I mean, I
I'm okay.
I would still rather see, even if we just draw out the language and take a look at it and vote it down when it comes through and it isn't gonna work for whatever reason, that's fine. I really, and I know you do it as part of your business practice, I just see it as a huge risk to, and a possible shift where if this starts coming out and it's becoming a normal, it becomes a lot more normal than it is now to get paid at closing, it's gonna create a huge risk to consumers. So.
If I'm gonna modify my report to make sure I get paid on the 5% of inspections that I do get paid at closing, and I'm gonna modify my report for the other 95% to make sure these realtors keep the realtors keep using realtors, for. So
They're still getting.
Already
it.
I just think it's
They're
just.
still getting. it.
I know, I'm doing that on purpose, I'm sorry.
Make me twitch. Make a motion.
Alright, so I make a motion to direct staff to propose clarifications about prohibiting payment of closing for inspections.
Lee's made a motion. Does anybody want to second the motion?
That's it, we can vote it down if it comes through and it just isn't important.
Well, we need to vote on this motion first.
Wait.
This one, we were in discussion, we had a second, so.
Yeah, Scott seconded. So Lee's made a motion. Let's do a roll call vote on it.
Lee?
Wait, hold on.
Do we have any discussion on it?
Well, on one side, you were saying clarification.
It's not clear.
It's not
No.
It's to amend the rule to require, to prohibit payment of closing.
All right. Any more discussion? Okay.
Lee?
Yes.
Dave?
Oh, we can't hear you, Dave, sorry.
Aye, yes.
Mike? Brian?
Yes, prohibit closings.
All together. Just no closing.
Bruce?
Nay, no.
Steve?
No.
Yes.
Sean?
No.
4-4.
Why do you do it 4 and 4?
Let's draw straws.
Doesn't hurt to.
I think
Water
it
dies if it doesn't, you don't get it. Under Robert's rules.
Yeah.
Oh, it dies?
It dies.
At a
Yeah,
time,
it
okay.
doesn't have a majority vote, it does.
So,
Okay.
Okay. Fair enough.
All right. All right. Request for future meeting agenda item. I can even talk anymore. Education, please start working on the rule change, apprentice
Looking at apprentice.
hours, all that stuff.
Pre-licensure.
Yeah. So that's something, education, SOP needs to bring back next meeting.
That's it.
we're gonna add education.
Looking at the apprentice requirements if the real estate license goes away.
Right.
But that's a 2-year cycle, just to be fair. 2 years.
Just want to make sure there's directive from the committee that the subcommittee can start looking at that. So.
Okay. That's what people are doing. Okay. Anything else that we need to bring back, that we know, that from this meeting needs to be brought to the next meeting?
Well, we'll bring just comments, we'll bring the rule that Abby talked about proposing, so if there's any comments, that'll come back.
Okay.
We're gonna do a training. I'm doing a training with all the committees in January.
Oh, okay.
And aren't we proposing 223?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Any
So
comments from that?
So 216 and 223, any comments on that we would bring forward?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, future dates. 17th is the suggested date, or 18th or 19th. 17th work for everybody?
Yeah, I think we discussed that too on the last 17th.
Okay.
January.
January 17th. That's the next,
3 or 4 is the last meeting.
the next meeting for everybody who's on the phone, January 17th.
January
10 o'clock.
17 works. Do you have the following meeting after that? You could possibly share the target date?
It'd be sometime in April, mid-April. I think it's the second or third Monday in
The
April.
17th is what I have marked tentatively. Is that still tracking?
I'm sorry, what was the date?
17th.
The 17th, Monday, the 17th of April?
That would still track,
Not
yes.
the 17th.
Which is tax day, if that makes sense.
That is tax day too.
No, 18 is tax day.
Can you do the 18th?
I can do the 18th.
I usually be in and out of country.
I'll be in the Los Angeles.
Do we want to decide on April's meeting date?
It would help me selfishly if we could get that on my calendar.
Can everybody do April 18th?
Yes.
Tony?
We'll be here.
Well, I'll be here, whatever we decide to do, I'll be here.
It's Tuesday today, so Tuesday work. Okay, Tuesday, April 18th.
No fire drill, please.
I'll work on that.
Thank you.
All right, so Tuesday, April 18th, 10 a.m.
All right.
Thanks, y'all.
Nothing else, we'll adjourn the meeting at 12:50.
Thank you, everybody on the phone.
Thanks, guys.
Hi, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.